Here we go. All right, I want to welcome everyone to the April 10th, 2020 virtual meeting of the New Jersey Antique Radio Club here in my radio room. Thanks for coming. Are there any new faces in the virtual audience? Anybody? I heard there might be some car club members from the Triumph Club. Anybody here? Triumph Club? Oh, maybe next time. Okay.
I'm a new member, but I don't have a video camera yet.
And who are you, sir?
I'm Jonathan Allen. I joined, probably a few weeks ago, and I was going to attend my first meeting, and it got called off because of the disaster, you know. But I'm very pleased to be a member. Alex is the one who inducted me. Oh,
pleased to have you. What do you collect, sir?
Well, I mostly I'm here because I work as a volunteer at the Sarnoff Museum. The Sarnoff Museum at College of New Jersey. Got you.
Well, what are your interests then?
Well, my interest is the history of radio, electronics, how the technology evolved. I have a fair amount of World War II vintage radio and electronic equipment, which I actually use in my consulting business as an RF systems designer.
Very good. Very good. Well, that'll make a very nice show and tell for us sometime.
Well, I have some presentations I can do when the time is right.
Oh, we like presentations. Very good. All right, so welcome to the club. Glad to have you.
Thank you very much.
Because what I'm looking at is a little snowman. But I'm sure the next time we will see a photo.
I will try to get myself a webcam as soon as I can.
Oh, I don't know if I'm supposed to enter here. This is Keith Murphy. Can anybody even hear me?
We can hear you, Pete.
Oh, okay. I just now got on because I didn't get the password or whatever, and I just now found it. I'm sorry if I'm interrupting. Yeah, I'm a new member. I'm a new member, and Dave Sika actually invited me. I live in Schoolers Mountain, New Jersey. Like old radios and televisions and stuff, and so I thought it might be interesting to join the group, and so this is my first time, and so I haven't been thrown out yet, so I guess I mute this once I get through talking.
Great, glad to have you. Wonderful.
And what is your name? I'm sorry.
My name is Richard Lee. I'm the president of the club.
Yes, I've seen I got the email from you, so I didn't know the face. Thank you, and I'll get off now.
All right, thank you. See you again.
Okay, Rich, can I interrupt?
Go ahead.
Pete, I don't show you listed on the communicator as a member. Would you like to be included in the communicator distribution?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
And I did get the letter from Richard Lee here that says, "Greetings, fellow enthusiasts, and tell us about the meeting." And it said I would be getting an email that would give me the stuff to get in here. And I never got that email. Somehow I got in here by going through the audio or something.
Okay, Pete, I'm going to give you my email address. Email me with, no, better yet, just give me your email address. Hang on a second.
Okay.
Stand by, let me get a pencil.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead. What's your email?
Okay, it's Keith, Keith, and then the initials M as in mother, G as in goose, and T as in Thomas. That stands for a car that I have, an MGT, at gmail.com.
Okay, so it's keithmgt@gmail.com?
Correct.
And the name again is Keith, what's the full name?
Yes, Keith Murphy, M-U-R-P-H-Y.
Okay, I'm done. Go ahead.
Okay.
Over to you, Rich.
Hey,
Right, thank you.
Bill Pritchett. Keith is also a member of the MG Club, as I am.
Oh my gosh.
ACA, so not Triumph Club, but MG Club members.
Well, we don't know how you got here. We were expecting Triumph Club members, but you are welcome.
Well,
Yes,
I've been a member for several years, and Keith just joined.
Yeah, I forgot you were in there. And Bill and I have something in common. We're the only two that we know of, at least. Both of us graduated in 1962 in Indiana.
And he actually knows some of James Dean's relatives. He grew up right in that area.
Yeah.
And I won't talk any longer.
Okay.
Hey, gentlemen, Thank you for joining. Thank you for coming to our virtual meeting this evening.
Hi, Richard. It's Marcia.
Hi, Marcia.
A message to Bill. On 4/1, I sent the email with Keith's information.
Really? Okay, it could have gotten lost, but either way, he'll be added tonight. Thank you, Martha.
Okay. How's everybody?
Marcia, you're a snow lady. Here's your picture.
No, I'm having dinner. No picture today.
All right, we will continue. Infirmary report. And folks, it's too damn long, believe me. I just received word that member Steve Calandra, was in hospital, and it's to do with COVID-19. I don't know any other details or any more information. I just got that today. But when I do find out anything else, I will post it and pass it along.
Who was that person?
Steve Calandra. Everybody should know Steve. He used to do his singing at our holiday party, and he likes to do his singing out at Kutztown too in the evening. A big car collector also. Okay. Member Bruce Diadamo. He emailed me 2 weeks ago, and I'll read you the email. Hello, Rich. I will be renewing my membership, but not until April. I've been battling a challenging bone marrow cancer that turned serious last November. I just had my transplant today. I'm marooned in HUMC until early April. These people are fantastic. And amid the chaos, I did not get a check out to the club. I hope to be up for the June meeting and even more so. The July swap meet I'm looking forward to, and say hello to everyone. Well, needless to say, my response to Bruce was, don't ever worry about your dues. They're paid, pal. And I wish him good luck. And I did send him an email today, but I didn't get a response. And again, as soon as I find out more, I will pass it on to the membership. Okay. Now, you all read about Bob Masterson passing away last month in our broadcaster. I knew Bobby for over 20 years, and he had a great eye for collecting interesting small tabletop radios. He attended swap meets all over the Northeast. He went to every one. And he always came back with a great show and tell that he showed to the Harps Club up in New York. So please keep these members in your thoughts. And then, of course, you read about the article from Dr. Forte about the passing of Hugo Picciani, who made a great contribution to our museum with the clean out of our club at his shop on 7th Street in Brooklyn of October of 2013. On a sidebar, Hugo's shop happened to be just 3 blocks away from where my parents were born on 10th Street. And of course, I went over after the clean out to pay my respects to their old neighborhood. All right, if there's any other members who should be on our infirmary report, please let me know and send me a personal email, okay? Thanks. Okay, on to old business. Well, as we all know, most of our old business was canceled. The NEVIC show in New Hampshire on March 1st made it in under the wire. I was told it was a good show, sold out, and well attended. Our spring show, Hamfest, was canceled by Parsippany PL. I was promised the money paid would be going to our fall show, which is November 7th. Okay. Speaking of canceled, since we see the word everywhere, canceled, I see it spelled with 1 L and 2 L's. I was wondering which was the correct spelling. Well, I asked Marion Webster, and she tells me both spellings are correct. But I prefer two L's. So keep that in mind. Okay. On to new business. Canceled, again with two L's. Everything's been canceled. I received notice from our sister club, Delaware Valley Historic Radio Club, that the Renegers is closed, but will honor our spring vendor reservations at the Fall Antique Radio Show on September 18th and 19th. So let's just hope for that without any difficulties. Okay. I received from the Mid-Atlantic Antique Radio Club, Mark, a complimentary copy of an autobiography by Alan Roycroft entitled Real Life Drama in the Radio Service Shop in the 1930s. And I have the book right here. He was born in New Zealand, worked radio repair in New Zealand, and after World War II, moved to Hawaii, where he worked as a radio station engineer. An interesting life. I'm going to read you a very short paragraph about this copy given to our club. It comes from Brian Bellinger. Dear Mr. Lee, the Mid-Atlantic Antique Radio Club has published a book describing the adventures of Alan Roycroft, a radio serviceman in the 1930s. Some of these stories were published years ago in Radio Age, even before Mark took it over from Don Patterson. It makes fascinating reading. A sample copy is enclosed that you can retain for your museum or club library. Sincerely, Brian Bellinger. Okay, thank you, Brian Bellinger. All right, so when we meet again live sometime in the near future, I'll bring the book and we'll lend it out to anybody who's interested in reading it. Copies will be for sale, and those details will be in our next month's broadcast. Okay. I have bad news and I have good news. First, the bad news. That is, the Tube Collectors Association, TCA for short, has dissolved for all the usual reasons. The good news is that since the NJARC is now a 501c3 listed charity with the IRS, the TCA was able to donate a generous distribution of money from their liquidated treasury to our treasury in the amount of $4,831.37. And this is the letter accompanying the check I will read. Greetings. As you are aware, the Tube Collectors Association was officially terminated on December 31st, 2019. We were blessed to be able to provide historic vacuum tube information to our members for over 20 years. We were also fortunate to terminate with a healthy ending balance, which our board elected to donate equally to 3 not-for-profit historic radio organizations, for which you are one. Please find enclosed Banner Bank check in the amount of $4,831.37, which is your portion of the distribution. We hope this donation will be helpful in increasing your organization's ability to preserve the history of radio. And we have to thank our Honor Club member, Ludwell Sibley, for this, who steered it in our direction. Thank you, Lud. And we only hope you're out there viewing this. About the money, I will let you know what our executive board intends to do with the check. Just stay tuned and we will report back. Okay, due to self-quarantining and folks wandering around their homes and basements and garages, I'm getting more and more inquiries for antique radio repairs. So if you consider yourself an expert If you would like to join the list of restorers for money, let me know. And when we start back to normal, there will be a lot of work out there. And I do mean it. I'm getting calls twice a day right now. Okay. Ham Shack Corner. We are entering the spring season of Handfest, but for the foreseeable future, all events are canceled. Double L again. All right. And what's canceled? Marconi Day, one of our favorites now. Field Day, canceled. And the Dayton Hamfest is canceled. But me being an optimist, I did make the ARLL application for our annual Summer Tailgate Hamfest, which will be July 25th on the grounds of InfoAge. Okay. Like I said, I'm an optimist.
Rich, did you say a canceled field day?
Yes, canceled Field Day in June, yes. Sad but true. All right. That's all I have for the moment, but we have some other things. Well, for one thing, let's have our virtual 50-50 sale of tickets and the drawing. Rick? Yeah, Rick. Can you help Sal with the tickets, please? Yeah, can you help Sal? I got the tickets here, all right? Here you go. All right, thank you. All right, great. Okay. Quick intermission, virtually. Well, I tell you, the sales were great, guys. I'm telling you, we've got a great pot here. Thanks, Sal. Thank you, Rick. Thank you very much.
Almost 65?
We got a load, Pi. We got a load. What was it, Rick? $178. All right. Okay, great. All right. All right, we need a volunteer to pick. Let's see. Hey, Sharon. Sharon, can you come down, please? Yeah, come on down. Come on down, Dan. Okay. Can you take a pic? Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, give me a ticket. Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Sharon. Okay, all right. The winning number is 5, 4, 8, 0, 7, 2, 7.
Got it.
Yes, last three numbers. 7, 2, 7. Uh-oh. This is a little embarrassing here. What's going on? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. All right. All right, not going to believe this, guys. I'm really sorry about this. This never happened before. But I've never won. I've never won before. But I happen to have the winning ticket. 727. Yeah, 727. Damn. All right. That's great. So I do thank you all for this nice pot. Great. I can use it. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, before we go on, it is 10 minutes to 8. We have a word from our sponsor, Sika Production. Are you ready, Sika Production?
Hey. All right, I don't see me on the screen. I don't know if it's switched, but I just wanted to say 3 things real quick. I still think it would be really nice if you could put your full name, your first name and your last name down so we know who you are. But most people did that. That was very nice. And I was going to remind everybody to mute their microphone, and everybody did that. So thank you. That is, we behave much better than all the other groups out there. And finally, and most importantly, I just wanted to give a really big shout out to the people who helped pull this together. Bill Soma and Al have been doing an awful lot of work behind the scenes trying to figure out the mysteries of this. And certainly the shakedown cruises on Al's meeting have helped me become a lot less ignorant. And Mike Lippman put a lot of time into putting this together, and a few other friends helped me. So, you know, this looks pretty successful so far. So thanks to everybody.
What's our count, Dave?
62 people at the meeting. That may be a record.
Excellent, excellent. Anything else, Dave?
I'm going to just sit here and enjoy the meeting.
Okay. All right, with that then, let's pass the meeting over to Professor Mike. Professor Mike, are you going to tell us about Joseph Henry now?
I am.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this, we're a month late, but I have some, I think is some interesting information about the early history of radio. This was not well known to me until I started researching Joseph Henry. And it's some early experiments that Joseph Henry did before Heinrich Hertz, in which he demonstrated both the transmission and reception of radio waves. And you'll see how that worked. So let me start. So who is Joseph Henry? So as I show here, he was a professor of natural philosophy at the College of New Jersey. That's what Princeton was known as before it became Princeton University. That distinction is now to what I guess was the old Trenton State. Is it Trenton State that became the College of New Jersey now? He was at Princeton, the College of New Jersey, in the town of Princeton from 1832 to 1846. And in 1846, he then left Princeton to go to Washington, and he started up the Smithsonian. And the image that I'm showing here is one of my favorite images from one of the student notebooks. You have to understand that this was a doodle on the cover of a notebook that a student that was taking notes in his class. And you can see that it says Notes on Natural Philosophy from Professor Joseph Henry, and listed below, let's see, does my mouse show up here? Yeah, you should be able to see my mouse. So these are the topics in the course. So somatology is actually materials. Attraction, I believe that was, I'm not actually sure what attraction was. Gravity, of course, mechanics, hydrostatics, pneumatics, heat, steam, electricity, magnetism, galvanism, that's a term that I'll tell you about in a second, sound and light. And on the left, again, this was, by the way, this was a student that became, I believe, a lawyer, but he was a very good artist. It's Theodore Cuyler. And as you can see, these are the people that he talked about in his course. You can see Newton, Newton with basically planetary motion, Galileo with the telescope. You have Archimedes with the Archimedes screw. We had Watt with his with his 4-bar linkage device for linear motion. Benjamin Franklin here with the kite. We had Gilbert with the dipping needle for measuring the Earth's magnetic field. Brewster for optics. Fulton here with the steamboat, and so on. Marvelous. The notebooks are a real treasure. There are about 20 notebooks that are known. And some of my information today is from the Joseph Henry students who took notes when he taught his course here at Princeton. Okay. So he was also the first secretary of the Smithsonian. This is an image that I use in my course on the history of engineering. And if we look here, we see Joseph. So this is from the National Portrait Gallery. The title of the painting is called Men of Progress. And what we have here, I've lost my mouse. There it is. We have Joseph Henry in the back here. This is 1862. So at this point, he was the head of the Smithsonian. And in the front here was basically his rival. That's Samuel Morse. In the middle of the screen there is the Morse telegraph register. Again, I've lost my mouse. I'm not sure why it's going away. This is the telegraph register. There are a number of other important people here. This fellow over here, this is Peter Cooper. This is Cooper from Cooper Union. He was an iron maker, and he also was responsible for the first locomotive on the B&O Railroad. I believe you have Samuel Colt here and the Colt revolver. You have Cyrus McCormick and the combine. There's Elias Howe is in here with an early sewing machine. And in the background here is Benjamin Franklin with one of his friction electrical machines. Oh, I skipped that other slide. I mentioned galvanism. This is important for the talk today. There were two different types of electricity in this early period when Joseph Henry was working. And one type was called ordinary electricity. We would know that as static electricity. And the other type was called galvanism. So galvanism was that due to electrochemistry. So in the modern day, you would say an electrochemical cell, or what we would call a battery, would be called galvanism. And when people did experiments in the early days of electricity, they usually did experiments to make sparks, which is what you did with electrostatics, or you ran a current in a wire and you measured the flow of current with a galvanometer. So I'll get to that in a moment. So I try to keep this, by the way, I only have 15 slides, but I have 5 demonstrations. And I think you'll find them interesting. I hope you will. So what is it that Henry did? So this image here is a picture that I took. I'm probably one of maybe 3 people at Princeton that knows where this is a painting is. It's in our engineering building. And this was a proposal for a mural that was painted by Gifford Beale, class of 1900. And what it's depicting here, so let's see, you can see what I wrote here. He sent, transmitted, and received, detected radio frequency electromagnetic waves in 1842. That's 44 years before Heinrich Hertz. So usually people mark the beginnings of radio with Hertz's experiments. And Joseph Henry, as we'll see, predated that by 44 years. And the title of this mural was the demonstration of electrodynamic inductive action at a remarkable, I have to move something here, at a remarkable distance in front of Nassau Hall, College of New Jersey, 1842. So on the left here is Nassau Hall, and on the right is Stanhope. That was, at the time, was the library of Princeton. And what he has here, as you'll see, are some Leyden jars. I'll explain what they are in a moment, and a wire, and he's using that to send an electromagnetic signal to a distance, and in this case, it's a distance of about 200 feet. Now, so electrodynamic inductive action at a remarkable distance in front of Nassau Hall. Okay, so let's see. Let me go to my next slide. So, oh, by the way, the people here, we'll see in a minute, is Vice President McLean. Our president's house is called the McLean House. He was the one who hired Joseph Henry. And then another individual that is in this is Professor Dodd. That's D-O-D. He was a mathematics professor and a good friend of Joseph Henry. And this was an event. Also, Joseph Henry had a house. So if this building behind here is Stanhope Hall, Joseph Henry's house was just to the left of this, and it has been moved, and it's now on the other side of the campus, right near Nassau Hall. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now, Princeton has a reputation of sort of being a little bit of an ivory tower, in which everything is invented in Princeton. This is I particularly like this. This is on the left here is from 1976. It's a cover of New Yorker magazine. So this is the idea of the snobbishness of New Yorkers. So this is the New Yorker's view of the world. And you see it's 9th Avenue, 10th Avenue, Hudson River, Jersey, then the Pacific Ocean, and in the distance. So Princeton has that same kind of snobbishness. So this was the cover of the Alumni Weekly. And in front here, we have Nassau Hall. There's Nassau Street, Princeton Township, the Midwest, the Pacific Ocean. And then, of course, in the distance is Princeton in Asia. So this is a Princetonian's view. I'm reminded of this. I don't know if any of you have seen my big fat, what is it, Greek wedding, where the father of the bride was very proud of Greek culture, and everything was Greek. So at Princeton, everything originates in Princeton. And of course, in this case, I think radio really does originate in Princeton. So what did he do? So on the left here is a collection of Leyden jars. So we'll see what Leyden jars are in a minute. All of you have some, I think most of you have some background in electricity. So these, a Leyden jar is a capacitor. It stores charge. And the origin of the term battery goes back to Benjamin Franklin, was that when you took a collection of these Leyden jars and hooked them together in parallel and then discharged it from the center to the side, you'd get a large snap of a spark would form. And they called these batteries. So the original term of a battery was not an electrochemical cell, but rather it was these Leyden jars. And then on the right here is from the mural that is now covered over in our old engineering building at Princeton. And it shows just what Joseph Henry was doing. So on the left here is Joseph Henry. This is Professor Dodd. In the back here is Vice President McLean. And what he has in front here is a friction machine. This is a spinning glass cylinder that is rubbed up against with fur and with pickoffs. And what it's doing as you spin it, here's the assistant is turning the glass here, which is rubbing the fur on the glass. The charge is getting transferred to the Leyden jars. And then in Joseph Henry's hand here, he has a little discharge element where he's going to discharge the Leyden jars, but not, instead of going from one center electrode to the edge of the jar, it's going to go from the center electrode through a very long wire and then back to the side of the jar. So, and it is, what we'll see is something that was surprising at the time, is that Joseph Henry figured out that the discharge of current, of charge, traveling from the Leyden jar through the wire back to the side didn't go in one direction, but rather it oscillated back and forth. It was an oscillatory discharge. Okay. So let me go to the next slide. Now I put together a timeline here. By the way, in putting together this talk, I realized that I could actually create a course, a 12-week course about just this subject. It's a very rich history. And I'm going to comment on a few of the items here. So these are the origins of some of the objects that are related to what I'm talking about here in Joseph Henry's experiment. So I'm not good at pronunciations, but there's this fellow von Guericke. He was the one who originated the first electrical machine, friction machine. Originally, it was spinning a ball of sulfur, and it was, again, a friction. It was moving charge. The idea of rubbing fur, for example, on amber goes back to the Greeks, but this was a machine for generating static electricity. Then in Leiden, this fellow, Mussenbruch, came up with a way to store charge. This is in 1745. It's named for the town he was from the city he's from. It was originally a jar that was filled with water, and there was an electrode that was a ball at the top with an electrode that went into the jar, and you could then transfer charge from the one of these friction electrostatic machines and store it up in the jar. Then an important development happens with Galvani in 1797 and Volta. They developed the beginnings of the electrochemical cell. And Volta figures out the very important idea of that the relationship between charge and voltage and electrical potential. That's a linear relationship, and this is the origin of Volta's law of the condenser. By the way, the term condenser and capacitor are used interchangeably, but the old term was the term condenser, and it goes back to Volta, and it was used for actually condensing charge. He had a device for moving charge from it was called an electrophorus, and he could then move the charge from the electrophorus and store it up in a Leyden jar. And the early electrochemical cells of Volta was a cell that was zinc and copper in a flask in a brine solution. That was the electrolyte. These were later replaced by electrochemical cells. So again, I'm just recounting the history. Now, it took 23 years from Galvani. Oh, and Galvani, of course, was the one who discovered the connection between an electrical potential and a frog's leg, a dead frog's leg. They found that if you gave electricity to a frog's leg, the leg would twitch. Now, it was 23 years from Galvani to Ørsted. So Ørsted, I think we probably all know, and by the way, we're in the 200th anniversary of Ørsted's important discovery, is that Ørsted discovered the connection between electricity and magnetism. I'll mention about that in a minute. One thing I found interesting was asking what were people doing with electricity between Galvani in 1797 and Ørsted. And it was very interesting. And by the way, in Joseph Henry's lectures at Princeton, at the College of New Jersey, he talked about this. One of the things they did is that they made these, Volta developed what's known as a pile. It was a zinc and copper in multiple flasks, and then eventually it was in a stack with paper soaked in brine. And they were able to generate a fairly reasonable voltage. And then they would do things like give themselves electrical shocks. So it was very common that people would put two wires to their tongue and get a shock. Now, I'm sure all of you, I did this as a kid, you figured out whether a 9-volt battery had any juice in it, you put it on your tongue. So that's the kind of thing that they were doing. The other thing that they were doing with electricity in this early days, by the way, they made pretty potent voltaic piles. They also were using it to separate water into hydrogen and oxygen. So it was electrolysis of water. So they would get these bubbles of hydrogen. So there's a lot of electrochemistry going on. So in this early period, from Galvani to Ørsted, it was basically a period of animal electricity, causing shocks in people, and a lot of chemistry, electrochemistry. Then comes Ørsted. So Ørsted, as I said, we're at the 200th anniversary of Ørsted's discovery. It was first done in 1819. He was a professor in Copenhagen, and they were doing experiments. He was a lecture demonstration showing some things with the voltaic pile. And then he brought the wire from the voltaic pile. Oh, one other thing, by the way, that they did with the voltaic pile is they learned that if you ran a current through a wire, the wire would get hot. So you could make heaters. So he ran a current through a wire, and he happened to bring it near his apparatus that he was also demonstrating magnetism. And he learned that the current in the wire affected the compass, the magnetic compass. And that was the beginning of a very exciting period in science, the linking of electricity and magnetism as being related. So that happened 200 years ago. So then, very shortly after Ørsted did his work, Arago, I think it's Francois Arago. Arago was was senior to Ampere, and Arago learned of Ørsted's work. Arago and Guy Lassac ran the scientific journal in Paris. And Arago learned about Ørsted's work and told his young associate Ampere about it. And Ampere started working feverishly on trying to figure out what was going on. And shortly after Ørsted did his work, Ampere did his famous experiment where he sent a current from a voltaic pile down some wires and showed that if the current in two wires were going in the same direction, the wires would attract. If they were going in opposite directions, they would repel. Now, I'm going to do a demonstration in a few minutes about the first time that steel needles were magnetized. And notice that what I have on this diagram here, I say magnetized steel needles, it's by galvanism and by ordinary electricity. So there were two ways in which Arago and Ampere together magnetized steel needles. As I said, I'll do a demonstration in a minute. One using a galvanic cell at a voltaic pile, and another one using a Leyden jar. That's one of these Leyden capacitor that stores up charge. I'm going to go through the list here, and then we'll get to some of these demonstrations. A few years after Arago and Ampere did their magnetizing steel needles, Sturgeon, who was from the UK, from England, developed the very first electromagnet. He used these zinc and copper cells of Volta as the powering source for that. And that's the beginning of the horseshoe electromagnet. Then there was a very interesting experiment done by Felix Savary in 1827, where he figured out that the Leyden jar, when it discharged through a wire, didn't discharge in one direction. We'll see where that comes from in a little bit. So that was 1827. Then I like these terms, by the way. Electromagnetism was discovered. That's magnetism from electricity was discovered in 1820. But here in 1831, both Michael Faraday and Joseph Henry, working independently, discovered that you could make electricity from magnetism. So that's magnetoelectricity was the term. So it took 12 years to realize that. So magnetoelectricity is the basis of electric generators, and electromagnetism is the basis of using electricity to produce magnetism. So this is the basis of motors. Then, not long after, this is also something that I was thinking of talking about today, but I'm not going to do it. But Charles Wheatstone, who was an English scientist, in 1834 wrote a paper using a very clever experiment. He figured out the velocity of electricity in a wire by timing sparks. He had a very clever device. I actually just recently read his original paper on this. in which he had a spinning mirror and a reflection on a wall, and he, by just using his eye, it was, but this is before photography, he was able to figure out that the electric signal that traveled down a wire was traveling at the speed of light. And he was only off by about a factor of about 50%. It was really quite impressive. Later, Joseph Henry, 1835, learned about the idea of self-induction. We'll get to that in a little bit. Henry left Princeton. He traveled for a year and visit Europe, and he visited Wheatstone and Faraday, and we have all of his letters and his, so we know when he was learning about what was happening in Europe, visiting these people. And then in 1842, he did these experiments about sending radio at a distance. Maxwell came up with his theory in 1865, and Hertz in 1886 is often, this is where people say that radio begins. But as we'll see, it really starts earlier. Okay, sorry that I spent so much time on this one slide. So now what is a Leyden jar? So here I have a picture of Joseph Henry, one of Joseph Henry's Leyden jars. We have at Princeton many of Joseph Henry's original artifacts. Many of them are also at the Smithsonian. And the Leyden jar is a jar. So the original ones, as I said, it had an electrode and a wire that went into water. And then the outside of the jar was covered with metal. So you'd store charge in the water, and then the other electrode was on the surface. The Leyden jars of the later generation had the inner side, it's a glass jar. The inner surface is coated with a metal. It was often lead, just melted in on the inside, and then it was lead on the outside. And then you'll see what the electrode would go down, and there would be a chain at the bottom that would touch to the inside. So I have the modern symbol for what we would call as our condenser or capacitor. It's just two plates separated by a distance. Now, this value, 1.6 nanofarad, is the capacitance, and I'll make a measurement in a second, of a Leyden jar that I have borrowed from the physics department. So we'll see what was the typical value of capacitance of the Leyden jars that Joseph Henry used. Now, many of us work with capacitors, and I think you know that they have a voltage rating. Often the separation between the two electrodes, it might be an airspace, or it might be separated by mica, or sometimes an electrolytic. It's an electrolyte, and it's an oxide layer from a metal surface, but they all have a voltage rating. Now, these early Leyden jars had the advantage because the insulator was glass that could withstand a very large, and it was a glass of a thickness of a few millimeters. It could stand very, very high voltages. So you could store charge in these and get the voltage up to many, you could get it to hundreds of thousands of volts without having dielectric breakdown. So it was possible to put a huge amount of charge in these capacitors. And then when you discharged it, by making a pathway from the outer surface, from the inner surface that was charged up to the outer surface, you could get a very large spark. Sparks typically, they would talk about 5 to 10 inches long sparks, very large sparks. So the first thing that we need to do is how do we measure the capacitance? Now, I'm going to use a modern tool to do this, and I'm going to bring on my camera right now. We'll do our first demonstration. So let's see if this works. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I'm going to now bring up my camera. Let's see if I can do this. So I hope everybody can see the laboratory here. I have a camera. And I'm going to turn it around now.
Yeah, we see fine.
Okay. And I said, I borrowed a Leyden jar from my friends in physics. I don't know whether or not this one has historical significance. But it is certainly of the type that Joseph Henry used. And I have a LRC meter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the LRC meter to capacitance. And then I have two electrodes, and I'm going to put one electrode on the inside of the jar and one on the outside of the jar. Now, the first thing that you think to do is say, well, just put one electrode on the ball and put one on the outside and measure the capacitance. That does not work. And the reason for that is, let me just show you. I'm going to lift this up. Actually, I'll lift it up and put it on the side of the table here. Get this really close. If you look closely here, you'll see that at the end of the electrode, there's a little tiny chain that then dips down to the bottom of the jar. And when you're depositing charge to it, what happens is there's an oxide that forms on the inside of the inner electrode, and you actually have to get a spark to jump across there. It's a very small distance. So if you try to measure it with a modern meter, you wind up just measuring the capacitance of the you get a very small capacitance, like picofarads. So the way to measure the proper capacitance of these Leyden jars is to literally go inside the jar. Let me see if I can get my camera a little closer. So what I'm going to do, there's an inner surface and then there's an outer surface. So I'm going to go with my probes here, and I'm going to put one lead on the inner surface and one lead on the outer surface and measure the capacitance of the jar. Okay, so let's see if I can do that. By the way, I go to the Smithsonian a lot, and they have a lot of these jars, and when I try to talk to my buddies at the Smithsonian and say I want to make measurements like that, their faces, the blood drains out of their face. They don't want you to touch any of the objects, which I think is terrible, because I believe that these objects were intended to be used. So, okay, so if you can look at the meter there, and we'll see what the value is. I'm going to put my leads on here now. One on the inside, one on the outside. Okay, so it's reading 1,630 picofarads. Okay, so I hope you saw that on the meter. So let's go back. All right, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Let me go back to my screen. Okay, 1,600 picofarads is 1.6 nanofarads. Okay, so we've just established what the capacitance is of the Leyden jar. Okay, so let me go to the next slide. Okay, now I'm going to introduce you to a simulator, an online simulator that's free that I use with my students. And this is really cool. But let's read what I put here. See, a charged Leyden jar discharged through a wire loop was found to decay in an oscillatory fashion by Savory in 1827. We'll see how he figured that out in a moment. But first, let's model the experiment using this tool. This is Paul Falstad's circuit simulator. Now, I have to, again, this is a little bit of Princeton pride here. So Paul Falstad was a student with Brian Kernahan, who's in our computer science department. Brian is sort of a hero in the world of computer science. Brian is one of the early people in Unix. And so this is Falstad. He lives, I believe it's in the Chicago area. He's actually now, I think he makes a living by making applications for iPhones, photography applications. But he's put together some amazing simulators and demonstrators of acoustics and electricity that's really quite spectacular. And what we're going to look at here, let me see if I can get my mouse. I'm going to show you a little simulation here where I'm going to take a battery and we're going to discharge it through a coil of wire with an inductance of 3 microhenries, the limiting resistor. And of course, when I close this switch, you expect the current to only go in one direction, right? And then when so the current flow on a battery would always be in one direction. If I put a sewing needle inside of that coil, right, with the current flowing there, I would expect the sewing needle to get magnetized. We'll see that in just a second. Now, in the case of the Leyden jar, I'm going to use this simulator. What I'm going to do here is I have a battery again. I'm going to close this switch, which is going to charge up this capacitor. Then I'm going to open the switch. So when the capacitor's charged, that would be the equivalent of transferring charge from an electrostatics machine. Then I'm going to close this switch here. And what I have is a capacitor in parallel with an inductor, and that is a resonant circuit. And then we'll see that the current will go in both directions. It will oscillate. So let me go and bring up the simulator tool. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I'm now going to go back and share. I've got it on Google Chrome here. Okay, so this is the simulator. So on the left here, so let's look at this top one. And I'll show you how to build these things with this Falstad. So I have a battery here. If I double click on it, it says it's 5 volts. So I didn't make the voltage very high. I have an inductor here. It's a coil. I set it to 3 microhenries. We'll see why I chose that value in a little bit. And then I put a series resistor here of 1 ohm. And then at the bottom left here, I'm looking at the current that is flowing in the inductor. And so I will put this here, and I'll see that it rises up with a rate of L over R. That's the inductance over the resistance here. And then it reaches a steady state current. And then when if I put a sewing needle in this, we'll see that that sewing needle would get magnetized, and that the direction, one end would be a north pole and the other would be a south pole. Okay, so that's what would happen if I used a galvanic cell to power current through an inductor. Now here's what happens. This is my simulation of a Leyden jar. So here's my 1.6 nanofarad capacitor. So what I'm going to do is charge it up. Now the way I would charge up a Leyden jar would be an electrostatic machine. Here I'm just going to close a switch, and then I'm going to open the switch. So now you see it's green here. It's showing me that it's charged. And at the bottom right here, I'm going to look at the current that's flowing through this inductor. So I'm going to close the switch here, and we see that it oscillates. Let me just stop that for a second. So why does it oscillate? Well, I'm storing charge in the electric field in the capacitor. When I connect it to the inductor, that creates a current, which creates a magnetic field. When the magnetic field collapses, you get a back voltage, and it oscillates back and forth. This is a classic resonator. And I see that the current is going positive and negative. So, so that is I'm just simulating here the discharge current through a coil of wire through a galvanic cell versus through a Leyden jar. And as you see, through the Leyden jar, the current goes in both directions. Okay, let's stop sharing that for a second. Actually, let me go back a second. I want to I'm going to show you something else that's kind of cool. So I created another. So here's that same arrangement here. So there's the Leyden jar. This is something you can do with this software that's just really cool. So here's the Leyden jar, 1.6 nanofarads. I'm going to discharge the Leyden jar through a wire loop of about 1 meter. That's about 3 microhenries. And I gave it a resistance of 3 ohms just because I didn't want it to be too high a Q. So it turns out the resonant frequency at which current goes back and forth in the resonator is about 2 megahertz. So here I created a 2 megahertz signal source, and I can turn it on here, and then I can turn this on and I can run my simulation. And what I see here is I'm seeing the energy building up in my resonating circuit here, and I can change the frequency. So it's a resonant frequency. So this is a forced oscillator. So I can, if I notice, look down at the bottom here, if I lower the frequency, I get less of a signal, less current flowing in the resonator circuit. If I bring the frequency up to the resonant, I get the biggest signal. And then if I increase the frequency beyond its maximum, I get a small signal again. So this is that resonance phenomenon. This is what we use for tuning radios. Al, Place, you're there. I was going to use, you have a nice diagram on your crystal radio page. Actually, we have to take a second. I'm going to give Al an advertisement here. I didn't get a chance to put this in. Here's Al's Skyways. He's got his crystal radio, crystal sets here. Crystal set design 101. If you look at the circuit over here, here is that resonant circuit. This is a tuning circuit that you use in a crystal radio. Sorry, Al, I wanted to put this in. I just ran out of time. Okay, let me go back now. How are we doing on time? All right. Yeah, we're not too bad. Okay, so let's go to the, so that was demo 2. Now, what did Figelix Savory do? So what Savory did, this is really pretty extraordinary when I learned about this. And I don't have a good diagram of it, but well, first off, there are 2 things I need to show you. I need to show you about magnetizing steel needles. And then I also need to show you about Savory's experiment. So the magnetizing steel needles, this was the work that was originally done by Arago in 1820, Arago and Ampere, by just running current through a coil of wire and putting a steel needle through it. And then the second thing is I'm going to show you about the hysteresis curve that you would get when you, this is magnetic induction is in the vertical axis and magnetic field is on the horizontal axis. But let's read what it says here. Savory found out that if he took several sewing needles that were placed at varying distances from the wire loop, so remember this is a Leyden jar powering a wire loop. So the current, I'll show it with my arrow here. So you have the Leyden jar here, and the current is going first in one direction, then in the other direction, back and forth. And then, whoops, go back. And then he would put sewing needles at different distances from this oscillating current and at perpendicular to the wire. So he put it at 1 millimeter away, 2 millimeters, 3 millimeters, went out to several centimeters. And then he would have the spark discharge of the Leyden jar, and that current would oscillate back and forth, and then he found that the sewing needles were magnetized. But he found that the ones that were closest to the wire were magnetized in one direction, and the ones that far away were in a different direction. It's very curious, and I'll see if I can explain what happened there. But from that observation, he deduced that the current was going in both directions. So what I want to do now with my first demo is I want to demonstrate the Arago experiment of magnetizing a sewing needle. So again, let me stop share here. Let me go back and go to my camera. Okay. I have another demo that I set up here. I don't know if I can get in really close on this. So what I have here is a power supply. So I think you can see it. I've got let me bring this close so you can see this. I have just a little soda straw with one wrap of copper of magnet wire around it, hooked up to a current limited power supply. So you could do this with a battery. Actually, I've done it with 3 D cells. So I'm going to run a current of about 4 amps through the coil. So I hope you can see this. I'm going to take my sewing needle and I'm going to put it through the center here. Then I'm going to turn off the current and it comes out. Now, what I just did now is I set it up so that the head of the sewing needle was to the right. Actually, I'm going to try making this come down a little bit so you can see this a little bit better. So this is the experiment done in the same manner that Arago and Ampere did their experiment. So they were worried about the sparking as maybe causing the effect of the magnetization. So they actually had the current on first. And so here I have a little wand here with whoops, that attracted it. So remember, I had the head of the sewing needle to the right, and it's the tail of the sharp point is being repelled by my little wand. Now I'm going to repeat the experiment. I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to do the same thing. So it's now going in the other direction. Let's see. Do this again. I'm going to put this to 4 amps again. I'm going to let it go through. It's now going through in the other direction. Okay, now before it was the tail. You can see this. So now it's the head of the sewing needle is being repelled. So I've reversed the magnetization. I've reversed the polarity of the sewing needle. So that's demo 1. Now comes what I think is a very exciting demonstration, which is that I have set up for you here. We're going to measure the BH curve. This is a hysteresograph for, so let me first show you what's on the screen. So this is B, magnetic induction versus magnetic field. So to measure the magnetic field is proportional to the current. So on the horizontal axis, I'm measuring the current in a wire loop. And in the vertical axis, I'm measuring the magnetic field with a Hall effect probe. This straight line is when it's just an empty coil. And so I see an effect there. This other line that I'm going to see here is when I use iron. So iron, this is soft iron, very pure iron. So we see that it has a very steep slope, and then it saturates. And then this other one is what I get for a steel needle. So it's an open curve like this. Now the key thing, we'll do the measurement in a second, but the key thing here is that if I run a current, remember current is, this is the magnetic field axis. If I run a large current, so let's follow this curve here for steel. So this point here and this point here are called the coercive field. At that point, when it's on the left of that point here, the magnet is pointing up. And when it's to the right, the permanent magnet is pointing down. So you coerce the magnetic field to flip in the steel. In the case of iron, iron doesn't retain its magnetization. Now notice if I'm over here, if I go up all the way up top here and then I come back and then drop the field to 0, then the needle is polarized in one direction. That's the north pointing up. If I go all the way to the other side and I come back and stop the magnetic field to 0, then it's pointing in the other direction. That's what I was just doing with the steel needle. So let's see what my objects are that I'm using to do this. So what I have here is a coil of wire. And this is a magnetic field probe. And I'm going to hook it up to this is an AC source that's running at about 1 hertz. Okay, and so I'm going to put the voltage to about 6 volts. So right now, actually, I have some steel needles in there. I'm just pulling them all out. And I'm going to zero my probe, put my probe right next to it. Okay, and I'm going to go on my screen here, and we're going to make a recording. I really need an assistant. Okay, so I'm going to delete all these runs. I'm going to hit record. Okay, I need to re-zero my probe. Oh, actually, it's probably okay. I'm going to stop it again. There's a slight error in the 0. That's probably because of the Earth's magnetic field. The important thing here, this is an empty coil that I'm doing. Let me delete that run. Okay, I'm going to hit stop. Now I'm going to go back over here, and I'm going to put a piece of iron in the core, in the coil. And I'm going to put my magnetic probe there. We'll come back. Let's measure it. This is the curve that we're going to get for iron. This is the soft iron. And then I'm going to, I've removed the iron. Now I'm going to put in some steel needles. So I have some sewing needles, and I'm going to just jam them in the center of the coil. By the way, I'm running this with a current of about 0.5 amp, and it's a few hundred turns of wire, of 26 gauge wire. I made this a couple of days ago, so we could do these measurements. Okay, now we're going to take a look at the same curve here for the case of steel. Okay, and I'll stop that. So if we look at that, again, we have these three different curves, and both the iron and the steel display saturation, but the advantage so the zero is a little off here. But the key thing is if I run the current through the coil in one direction and then bring it back to zero, let's see, if I run the current in this direction, okay, so I'm running it in this direction. So remember, on this side, let's say the head of the sewing needle is up, and the pointy part is, let's say that's north. I go here, it flips over. I come over here, so let's see. So if I come here, if I brought it in this direction, came up to this point here, and then brought the field back to zero, it's going to, let's see. So this is reversing the direction. So I go in one direction. I'm sorry, if I follow in one direction, I come up here, I follow in one direction and stop here. So I'm reversing here, I'm pointing up, and then I bring it back to this point. Then at that point, it's still pointing up. So this is the remnant field. So it's still pointing up. If I reverse the direction, going the other way, I come over here, it's then pointing down, and then I reverse, come back down to zero, it's pointing down. So this is the remnants field of steel. Steel becomes a permanent magnet. Iron is a temporary magnet. Okay, let me stop for this for a second. Now, to figure out what Savory was observing requires your understanding that the oscillating current in the Leyden jar that discharges has a field that ramps down. So it oscillates and then it goes down to zero. And the issue is that depending on how strong the field is, where you are relative to this coercive field, you can wind up, in this case I'm showing two cases where it's oscillating and winding down to zero. In one case where it's red, where it's left pointing up. In other cases, it's green and pointing down. And that caused the phenomenon that led Savory to recognize that the field was oscillatory. Okay, let's keep going here. Now let's see what Joseph Henry did. So Joseph Henry replicated Savory's experiment and extended it so he could magnetize sewing needles in a secondary loop. This is from one of the student notebooks. Here's the Leyden jar. Here's a wire loop. The wire loop was about 1 meter. And then he was able to produce a current in secondary loops. And in one of them, what he did is, on one of these secondary loops, is he took a spiral of wire and put a sewing needle in it. And when he discharged this, he found that he could magnetize the sewing needle. And so let's read what I've put down here. So what did he do? So a Leyden jar was charged using electrostatic generator, fur on glass. It's a friction machine. He figured out that the current from the charged Leyden jar, when discharged through the wire loop, was oscillatory. So this is something that Savory also did. And he did this by, or Savory did it by just having a steel needle near it. He did it by coiling a section of the wire loop. So he put a little spiral right in here and placed a sewing needle inside the coil. So it was different than Savory's. And then he found that the sewing needle was polarized by the discharge current, but sometimes in one direction, sometimes in the other, because the current is going in both directions. And then he found that he could magnetize a sewing needle in one of these secondary loops, and then he had that secondary loop at first 30 feet away. And so he was 30 feet. So he had the Leyden jar and the loop in his laboratory, and then at the ground floor, 2 floors below, he had this wire loop. And when he had the spark discharge here, he was able to, it was a radio frequency oscillation that he would see here, and it would then magnetize the sewing needle at a distance. So that says demo 5. So this is my last demo. So let's go back. This one is the, should be cool. I hope you're going to enjoy it. First off, we'll take a look. I've already done it, and I'll recreate it again. So this is Joseph Henry's transmitter, etc. Oops. I'm going to raise my camera up so we can see it without a glare. Okay, let's see what's on the oscilloscope right now. So first off, you see the oscilloscope right now has just a wire loop attached to the input of the oscilloscope. So that's a loop antenna. Okay, that's going to be my detector. And I'm going to turn off the trace, and it's now triggered and ready to go. And what I have over here, let's just take a look at what I have here. This is a Wimshurst machine. It's an electrostatic generator machine. Again, I'll show you the different pieces. So this is not a friction machine. These are later type of static machines, but they work the similar way. So I have two Leyden jars. Let's see if I can find my, if you notice, so there's a wire here, copper wire, that is going, so normally when you use these things, there's a ball on the bottom connected to one of the Leyden jars, and there's a ball on the top connected to the other Leyden jar, and you make a discharge between the two of them. What I'm doing here is different. Instead of going from one jar directly to the other, I'm going through this wire. Let me back up on the wire. See the wire. I have a wire. This is my inductor. That has about 3 microhenries worth of inductance. And then I have my 2 Leyden jars here. And so I'm going to take the charge from this one Leyden jar. It's going to go through this wire loop, and then it's going to discharge to the other one. So that's this is a capacitor, and this is an inductor. And the current, when it discharges, it'll go back and forth. And so I'm going to run up the Wimshurst machine. Take a look at the spark discharge. So the discharge, just to show you, the discharge will go from this point to this point. And I hope it doesn't crash the computers, but we'll see. Okay, you saw the spark. Did you see the spark? I don't know. I can. Dave, can you come on a second so I can hear you, see you?
Did not
see the spark?
I didn't.
Okay, let's do it again. Okay, it had a snap. Okay, I'm going to clear my screen here. Okay. Did you see the spark there?
We can take your word for it.
Well, let me get it a little closer, see if I can. So again, the place you want to look, it may be that it's not, the place you're going to want to look is between, it's going to go between this ball, and this ball. I'll leave the arrow there. Let's see if you see it.
Can you lower the light?
I could turn the lights off. Hang on. Good idea.
Mm.
All right, let's see if that works. See it? Oh, yeah, I don't see it on my screen either.
However, I hear it.
We hear it. You can certainly hear it if you can't see it.
So there's a, pretty good spark. So when that happens, I'm going to clear the screen now. Every time it sparks like that, let's see, you can see it, the oscillation on the oscilloscope, but I'm going to clear it, and then I'll run it again. Okay, you saw that it triggered the scope, and then we got an oscillation. That oscillation is going at about 5 megahertz. So that's the oscillatory discharge transmitter that Joseph Henry used, and then his detector was a wire loop at a distance of 30 feet. So I'm almost done. So let me, okay. All right, so that's what he did. So this is what Lord Kelvin said. By the way, this is how Kelvin signed his name, Kelvin. This is William Thomson. He clearly admired, he was at the University of Glasgow. He clearly admired Joseph Henry. From the introduction to Hertz's work, the English translation in 1891, this is a paragraph from the introduction. It said, Professor Oliver Lodge has done well in connection with Hertz's work to call attention to the old experiments and ideas taken from them by Joseph Henry, which came more nearly to an experimental demonstration of electromagnetic waves than anything that had been done previously. Indeed, Henry, after describing experiments showing powerful enough induction due to a single spark from the prime conductor of an electric machine is these electrostatic machines, to magnetize steel needles at a distance of 30 feet in a cellar beneath with 2 floors and ceilings intervening, says that he is disposed to adopt the hypothesis of an electrical plenum, and concludes with a short reviewing sentence. It may be further inferred that the diffusion of motion in this case is almost comparable with that of a spark from a flint and steel in the case of light. Those are words right out of Joseph Henry's paper in 1842. So here Lord Kelvin is crediting Joseph Henry with this early demonstration of electromagnetic transmission and detection. And then another, that was in 1891. About 7 years earlier, this is what Lord Kelvin came to Philadelphia. Some of you are members of the IEEE, and you may know that the IEEE got started after an exposition in Philadelphia at the Franklin Institute. That was in 1884, and it started as the American Institute of Electrical Engineers, and that is now the IEEE. And Joseph Henry died in 1878, so this is a few years later. Kelvin was there at the meeting, and this is what Kelvin said about Joseph Henry. Now, this is comparing Joseph Henry and Michael Faraday. This has to do with their work in induction. I fear I have taxed your patience too long, but I cannot sit down without again reflecting on the men whose lives have been patterns to the world. There is none more remarkable, perhaps, than the man of this country, Joseph Henry, who ended his days here. He and Faraday were patterns of scientific investigators. In some degree, they went parallel and made similar discoveries. Henry indeed preceded Faraday in the great discovery of electromagnetic induction between unmoved conductors. Faraday's law was Faraday moved a magnet in a coil to show you produce a voltage. Henry did it from one coil to another. Henry gave the warmest welcome to all practical applications of his discoveries. He sought to make none himself, not because he superciliously despised the application of science to the public good, but because his own convictions constrained him to go on in pure science, because he felt, as Professor Rowland has said so well in respect to Faraday, that it would have taken him from his work to have devoted himself at all to the practical applications of his discoveries. But what a beautiful trait of character it is to see what a kindly welcome he gave to those who did make practical applications. He saw what might be done, but deliberately left it to others. So that applies both to his work on the telegraph and also his work on radio. And again, this is that timeline that I showed earlier. So I think that is the end of my presentation, and I would like to open it up to a Q&A. If anybody is still there.
Yeah, I'm still with you. This is Marv.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I have a minor problem, okay, because even the later scientists that talked about Henry's discovery, they all used the word induction. And I think it's a leap of faith to go from induction to electromagnetic radiation, which is what we see in radio.
Yeah.
I mean, did Henry actually think that electromagnetic waves were moving through air?
Oh,
or
yeah.
did he still feel like they were being induced? In other words, being induced by induction, which is a far cry from radio waves.
Okay, so let me. It's a perfect question, Marv. And Al and I had this discussion about it.
Excuse me, Mike. Can you unshare your screen? Then we'll get the pictures of people back.
Oh, I see. Great. Okay. Good idea. Great question, Marv. So first off, let me begin by mentioning that Hertz's original experiment was done in the intermediate field. Okay, so the issue has to do with radio versus induction, has to do whether it's near field, intermediate field, or far field. And so a transformer works by induction. Okay, whereas an antenna, a transmitting and receiving antenna, where you're many wavelengths apart, works by radio transmission. They scale differently. So induction is a dipole process that scales as 1 over r cubed. Radio scales as 1 over r squared. Okay, so there's a different scaling, but there's an intermediate zone. So one thing that was clear, both Hertz and Henry both were working in the radio frequency range. And in both cases, Hertz's experiment and Henry's early experiments had to do with being in the intermediate field. It was on the order of a couple of wavelengths. But I didn't tell you about Henry's exciting work having to do with detecting lightning. So he magnetized sewing needles in his study. The roof of his house was a metal roof. It was turned. And he had a wire running from the roof into his study with a spiral where he put a sewing needle in it, and then the other end of the wire went into a well. And when there was a lightning storm, lightning flashed 20 miles away. You could figure that out by the time that it took for thunder to come. He found that he was able to magnetize sewing needles from a distance of 20 miles. So that is very definitely radio frequency, long distance electromagnetic magnetization of a sewing needle. But it's a really good question. And as I point out, it's both Hertz and Henry's, their major experiments were done in the intermediate field. Does that make sense? And Al, do you have a comment on this? Because we started talking about it.
That pretty much covers it. And I think your r squared versus r cubed thing is really the answer to all of that.
Right. So by the way, that's it's a well-known effect. This actually comes in having to do with the dipole interaction between atoms. My background, by the way, I'm an atomic physicist by background, and the law that binds atoms together, they're either 1 over r cubed or 1 over r to the 6th, and it has to do whether they're dipole-dipole interactions or charge dipole interactions. So that comes in at the atomic scale for molecules, but it also applies to radio. So it's, but that, that's certainly a way to figure out whether or not you're talking about induction versus radio. Now, at the time of Joseph Henry, in 1851, he wrote an article in which he used 2 different terms to talk about induction. That's why he used the term electrodynamic induction, because that was due to this idea of oscillation, whereas the induction that he saw earlier was actually a transient effect. So both Faraday and Henry, in their earlier discoveries of electromagnetic induction, those had to do with just the closing a switch and getting a transient.
May I ask you one other unrelated question?
Sure.
Okay, next to the Wimshurst machine,
Wimshurst.
on your bench,
Yep.
there's a square box with two plates, glass plates. What is that? I've seen it advertised, but I never knew what it was.
It's an electroscope. This is actually, just give me a second. This is, I was going to show that. Let me bring my camera back up a second.
I believe that's a.
So it's a, whoops. So you're talking about this box here?
Yes, that's the one.
All right, so if you look in the center there, it's, you've probably heard about these gold foil electroscopes where you just have a center electrode and then two thin foils, and then when you charge it up, the foils separate. In this case, there's a little pivot here. So one side of this will get charged, and then the other side will repel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook this up to my Leyden jar. Let's do this right now. So I've got a little clip here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to discharge the Leyden jar. So I'm going to clip it on here. As I run up the Wimshurst machine, you can see the Wimshurst machine in the distance here. Can you see that? So could you see it turn? So it's measuring the electrical potential, right? And then if I bring the two balls of the Wimshurst machine together, so I discharge them. So I take the charge away. You basically can use it as a measure of the charge.
Marv?
Got it.
Marv,
Okay.
this is Ray. This is Ray. If you come into the hands-on room, we have one of those. In
Yes,
the museum.
this is a Braun electroscope is what it is.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know the type. It came with, when I bought the Wimshurst machine, I bought it at the same time.
At the Princeton Plasma Physics, I remember using an electrostatic voltmeter, which works on the same principle.
Okay. Any other questions? So again, if I were to summarize just this whole thing, is that Joseph Henry, his transmitter was an LC circuit, a resonator, just a Leyden jar and a wire loop, and his detector was another wire loop that was used to just magnetize a sewing needle. Oh, you know, there's one thing I was going to talk about this. There's this issue about a spark. So, you know, what is a spark is something that both Henry and Wheatstone were concerned about. So, you know, when you have a spark discharge, you know that you ionize air, but you can have a spark in a vacuum, so you don't have to have any air present. So spark, there are two elements to a spark. One is it's a field emission, so electrons will come from one electrode and jump over to another to create a current. And then the current will then heat up the metal, and that metal will vaporize, and you get a glowing discharge. That spark spectra is you can see the metal. So if you had a spark discharge with two pieces of copper, it's a green color. If you did it with two pieces of iron, it's blue. But if there's air present, in addition to the metal discharge, the current going through the air will also ionize the air. When you have the ionized air, then can conduct. So the spark in the presence of air acts like a switch. That's why when I was demonstrating my LC circuit, I was closing a switch. That was the equivalent of the spark. And I should mention this. I'm going to bring up my screen for a second. I have a web page that I created. Let me just go to the Chrome here. I have a web page. See if I can find this. Did I bring it up? I'll bring it up right now. It's commons.princeton.edu/Joseph Henry. So this is a web page that I have for my Joseph Henry project. And I have a link down here that's called oscillatory discharge. So I have some of the references that I used for the for this talk. It explains this. I did not really explain this well, but it's. Let me go back to the oscillatory discharge. So this is that experiment. We have it written up here. So this was the signal that I got for one wire loop. I think this was a 2-meter wire loop, and this is a different frequency for a different length wire loop. But at the bottom here, I had a photodiode that was looking at the light coming from the spark, and then this is the radio wave, the radio signal. And you note that as the spark extinguishes, the radio signal extinguishes, because as the air becomes less ionized, it becomes more resistive, and that causes the loss of the signal. So one of the features of these sparks is that they last long enough. The ionized gases are there long enough so that current can flow across the gap. So this was a verification that the light tracked the radio waves. Okay. Any other questions?
Mike, this is Ray.
Yeah.
Is this revelation of Henry's prior work accepted or well understood, or is it just a local?
Okay, so I should show you. It is widely accepted, but totally obscure. Okay, so for example, one of my favorite references, I have several of them here. This is Syntony and Spark by Aiken. Okay, he's a ham radio. He's a University of Amherst. He was a friend of Joe Taylor. You guys know Joe Taylor, Nobel Prize winner, and the Diana site. So Aiken gives proper credit to Joseph Henry. I have certainly as I said, Lord Kelvin gave him proper credit. There's this other fellow, Gluckman, who's from Washington, worked with the Defense Department, wrote a whole series of articles about Joseph Henry's out-of-door experiments. Here's the early history of radio. So it's widely accepted. Also on my website, there's this really nice article from 1940 by one of the engineers at Bell Labs that wrote a very nice piece sort of laying out the early history of it. Also, the premier history of science journal is called ISIS, ISIS, and there's a nice series of articles talking about the prehistory of early radio. Now, the reason it's obscure is actually, I understand that from reading up on this. Most of us attribute Hertz to the beginning of radio, but Hertz's real contribution was validating Maxwell's equations. So remember, Maxwell came after Henry. So Maxwell had his marvelous Maxwell's equations in the wave equation, and then it needed experimental verification, and that is what Hertz did. And unfortunately, he died young. I think he died, if I'm not mistaken, of a tooth infection. He had an infected tooth and septus, and then died. So I think he didn't make it past like his late 30s. Okay, anyone else? If not, I'm going to pass this back to Richard.
I just wanted to say, excuse me, I just wanted to say that as a fellow physicist, I really enjoyed the talk, and I learned an awful lot that I had not known before, and reviewed some stuff that I'd forgotten. Thank you.
Mike?
Yes.
Hi, this is John Riccolo. I don't know if you saw in the chat section, but somebody, and I forget who it was, I can't give them proper credit, but they asked about those batteries that were discovered, or what looked like batteries that were discovered in Persia, that predate all this by about 1,000 years. You know anything about that?
Nothing.
Okay.
I do know that there were old batteries, but it's
I believe that according, at least one of the interpretations that archaeologists have made, is that they figured out how to electroplate, and they would electroplate metals to make pretties and jewelry and stuff like that.
Well, that's quite remarkable for the time, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's quite remarkable what the Greeks did. It's certainly they had they had this understanding of amber. Well, and also the Chinese having to do with magnetism. I mean, it's just a lot of the early history is really quite interesting. One thing, the reason I was pushing this business about soft iron versus steel is with our students today. If you ask a student what's the difference, between them, the ones that have gone through physics, magnetism is not a subject that is covered very well in most physics courses. The idea of permeability comes up, but the difference between hard and soft materials is very important. So iron is soft iron. Joseph Henry and the people of his day knew this. You could use it to improve the attractive force of an electromagnet. But if you took away the current, it ceased to be magnetic. It was a temporary magnet. Whereas steel, the harder the material, would tend to retain the magnetism. And so, and that's, again, this was something that was known then that our students today generally do not know. But all of us who have worked with screwdrivers, right, that have become magnetized know it, right? Because that's because they're hard steel, and the harder the steel, usually the stronger they become magnetized. Okay, Rich, you wanted to finish up the meeting? Do I have to unmute you?
I think he'll be able to unmute himself, but I'm not sure where he is.
Okay, here I am. Okay. Listen, Professor Mike, unbelievable. But it's like, as usual, it's something we expect from you. It's just amazing. And what we really appreciate is how you are able to dumb it down for us, too. That's what we really appreciate. Okay. Any other questions? Now, look, our next meeting is scheduled to be for May 15th, all right? Now, that would be the third Friday of the month, and that was because of Kutztown. But since Kutztown will not exist this spring, we may go back to the 8th, maybe on May 8th. We'll talk about it. But that will be held probably virtually here. And it will be show and tell and hints and kinks. So stay tuned and we'll let you know as time goes on. All right, I'd like to officially end our meeting, our virtual meeting here. And I want to wish everybody health and stay safe. And please have a safe drive home. All right, so officially the meeting has ended. But if you'd like to stick around and chit-chat, please do. So let's chit-chat.
Well, I'd just like to ask Mike a question. Are you still there, Michael?
I'm still here.
Are we all going to be receiving electrical engineering degrees from Princeton after attending this tonight? I think we might qualify for that. We'd send you $20.
Well, I'll tell you. I think only if you pay. And I'll tell you. I probably shouldn't say this because it's probably university confidential, but I think it's true of every university. There's a lot of belt tightening going on right now. Universities across the country, sure across the world, are worried about their revenue and meeting payroll. So I think if you made an offer to our provost, I'd certainly support it. By the way, I'm doing my courses online, and it's tough because I teach laboratory courses. So that's it's really tough to have students do things with their hands when they're not here. But we're trying.
Prof. Lindemann, this is Neville. I was trying to figure out exactly why the needles ended up magnetized in different directions. Is it because of the vagaries of the spark and the length of the discharge and where it leaves off in the BH curve and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I can tell you exactly. I didn't want to get into too much detail, but I will with you, Neville. Okay, so it's the field is largest right at the wire, right? If you run a current through a wire, it falls off as 1 over R, right? So imagine you have an oscillating field. It was just beautiful what Savory did, right? So imagine you had a magnetic field probe, right? Let's say 1 millimeter from the wire. You'd get an oscillatory discharge, right? It ramps down. Now remember that there is a threshold field on that in terms of when you get to the coercive field. So when you're at 1 millimeter, the amplitude of that oscillating wave is different than it is at 2 millimeters, and different than it is at 3 millimeters, and different than it is at 4. And so the issue is when there's that threshold where the field is just large enough to cause it to flip. So in one location it might flip, in the next location it wouldn't. So what they found is that at the field direction of let's say the 3 needles closest to the wire, they would be pointing up. Then the next couple of them, they wouldn't be magnetized very well. Then they go a little further, and then they'd be magnetized in the opposite direction. And then a little further, and they're back up again. So, the whole discharge happens on the order of less than a millisecond, microseconds, right? It's because it's a ramped field. But because of that threshold field for flipping the spin, it's able to sort of left that remnants. Did that make sense? I mean,
yeah, it does, and it sounds like it's the basis for magnetic core memory.
So core memories work similar way, right? So core memories, you're exactly right. You have a core, and you have 2 wires going through it, right? And then you have a simmer, your row and your column, right? And when the 2 fields get together, they flip the spin. So it's exactly like a core memory.
Thank you.
So how is that different from the function of a degaussing coil, which, according to what you just said, would seem to leave it one way or the other as opposed to removing the...
I believe the degaussing coils run at a pretty high frequency.
60 hertz.
60 hertz. No, so actually it's not nearly as the frequency of this. These frequencies are megahertz.
Mm-hmm.
So a degaussing coil, don't they ramp them down though? Is that right? So
physically.
No, but you go from a high field down to a small field.
By moving it away, yeah.
By moving it away. And so that does a similar sort of thing. So, by the way, the remnants field it's still a relatively small field. I can show you, hang on a second. So that was also on my webpage there. So I have Savory's papers here. Let's see. I have let's see where I have Henry studies LC circuits, Leyden jars, modern recreation, Savory's method. We recreated Savory's work. Somewhere in here, I have Savory's original paper scanned. I think it might be here. So the data is, it's really pretty impressive. It's 1827. Maybe I'm not going to be able to find it so quickly. 24, 30. So if you look at his data, it's basically, it's as I described. When Joseph Henry tried to recreate these experiments, I'm going to stop looking for it. When Joseph Henry tried to recreate it, he couldn't duplicate Savory's work until he used a very fine sewing needle. So the original needles that he used, he said was a number 3 needle. So it's a kind of a big heavy needle like the one I have here. And then when he went to a very fine needle, he found that he was able to recreate Savory's work. So the thing that I found really impressive is what these people were able to do with no instruments, right? I mean, their measuring device was a sewing needle and a mariner's compass. I mean, it's just marvelous experiments.
Dr. Lippman, this is Marv again.
Yes.
I always thought that a Wimshurst machine was just the mechanical equivalent of running a rod, across a piece of fur. And after I investigated a little bit, I found out it was truly very complicated.
Well,
it was just ingenious. So maybe one of these days you could give a lecture on how those things really operate.
Yeah, well, I have some students working. So one of the earliest ones, these are called influence machines. They worked on and induced, so they can be, you remember there were 2 Leyden jars, and I said one's plus and one's minus, and they can, if they get started randomly. So you can run it one time, and one side will be plus, and the other side's minus. You do it again, and it might be the flip of it. It turns out that Lord Kelvin had the water drop influence machine. Actually, I do have that's on our webpage as well, where it basically had a trough of water with 2 rings where the water drips down to different sides, and they go into metal cans that cross with each other. And basically, it's the electric field tends to go unstable, and it winds up charging up. I could do a lecture on it, but they're really cool. They came later. It was the end of the 19th century, with the middle of the 19th century, the end of the 19th century, were these influence machines. And they work really well. Can't hear you. Can't hear you. You need to unmute your microphone, Marv.
When I was about 12 years old, I tried to build one of those water drop machines. And what you did was you put a neon bulb between the 2 sides.
And
when enough charge got up, it would light the neon bulb.
Yep.
But I never could get it to work.
Yeah. So you probably have heard of the Van de Graaff generators.
Yes.
So Van de Graaff was here at Princeton, and in the physics lecture hall, they still have Van de Graaff's original generator, which they use for teaching the freshmen about these electrostatic machines. Again, it's kind of cool that this stuff is still around, and it works.
Yeah, can you hear me, Michael?
Yes.
Oh, okay, this is Keith Murphy. This is the first time I've been with the group, and I appreciate all the stuff you did. It was Greek to me, but like I say, I'm a newbie. But at my age, if I learn something new, I'm happy, and I learned something. Here's a question I have. It sounds like something like you're talking about. I have a gizmo, a gun, that I point at my record albums, and it makes a pop, and then you're supposed to pull it away. And does that make any sense? And
it could be static electricity for dust.
Yes, I think so. Yes, I think
so. It's probably probably one of these like igniters that you use in your gas grill.
Yeah, actually, it does sound like that, and it's supposed to, I think, pull the magnetism away for something from the record.
It's probably electric charge.
Yeah, it's called zero stat, so that may be what it is.
Oh, yeah, and it's also when you have an electric discharge, you can see this with the Wimshurst machines, they have a tendency to generate ozone. And the ozone, I think, has some effect on the static charge. There may be other people here that know more about this, maybe Al. Al, you tend to be a expert on a lot of these things, but my guess is that it would be static electricity and dust.
Yes, I believe it's something to do with dust as well. Yeah.
Well, as far as I know, it's piezoelectric, like the lighter things. And yeah, I think it's a matter of they're getting enough voltage to get ozone, which then neutralizes the static charges on things.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes sense. Thank you.
Stay well, everybody. Thanks so much for a great presentation, Michael.
Okay, great. Okay, so as Richard said about being safe driving home, I'm walking home. So that's.
You've probably got the longest commute than the rest of us.
It's 1 mile. It's my exercise for the day. I've been bringing my dog with me too. There's nobody here, so he keeps me company.
You've got a beautiful dog.
Yeah, so but he's really upset right now because he can't play with his friends.
He's being very quiet.
So he loves to mix it up with all the neighborhood dogs, but we've been keeping him away. So by the way, here's my gripe of the day. So I went out at 6 in the morning to go to McCaffrey's to buy groceries because they have the senior hour. Okay, so I loaded up. I loaded up, spent $300 on groceries. Okay?
Wow!
But they took some stuff away from me. So it turns out, don't you love New Jersey? It turns out you can't buy wine before 9 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
So this is at 7 a.m. and they said, no, we can't. You have to hang around till 9 o'clock. And I said, I just take it back. So I remember as a kid, I had trouble, getting a beer, right, when I was underage. Right now I'm of age, I can't get it. They're having senior hours, not letting you buy a bottle of wine is a problem.
Well, now we're over age.
Over age, yes.
Yeah.
And yet they're doing go cups at the restaurants here like it was New Orleans.
Right.
Really, Dave?
I'm sorry? Okay.
I think at one time Jersey had was noontime. On Sundays you couldn't buy food.
So I grew up in Bergen County. We had blue laws up in Bergen County.
That's right.
Only grocery stores could be open.
Still do.
They still have them in Bergen County? Yeah. And then, what's this business? They don't trust us to pump our own gas. I mean,
that's a good thing now.
Well, I suppose it's good, but it's
only us in Oregon.
Oh, it's only the 2 states? I didn't know Oregon was that way too.
I thought Oregon
They're not. They
got away with
stopped.
that.
Yep. They stopped 2 or 3 years ago.
No, and only Oregon has a Blockbuster store anymore.
Yeah, this is
Hey, I just found my Blockbuster Video membership card.
You could probably sell it on eBay.
Darren.
Yeah, this is Keith Murphy. I'm a member of the National Motors Association and do a lot of stuff with cars. I can tell you why. The original reason we couldn't pump gas was because, you'll laugh at this, it was because they were afraid consumers would blow themselves up for doing this. I'm not kidding.
I say. Okay.
Hey, while we're at it, this is Marv.
Yep.
Can I add a personal note to Dave? Dave, you out there?
I'm still here.
Hey, Dave, you owe me a bag of nickels.
I do.
A nickel
Opposed
bag.
to a nickel bag.
No. There's a big difference.
TMI.
You club somebody with them or what? You can't just dangle that out there in front of 50 people and not explain.
I made a bet with Marvin. He won.
Okay.
Hey, I have a question for Al Clace.
Yeah, go ahead.
What model breading is over your right shoulder?
It is a breading 14.
Okay.
Whatever it is, Joe Crow had one.
Hey, John Tominski,
Yes.
would you like to take this opportunity to give us a little talk?
No. What?
What talk?
Okay.
Let's see. What do you think, Darren?
Well, I mean, I guess we can give people something to look forward to when all this mayhem is over.
Please do.
All right. Well,
okay.
well,
Okay,
Darren
I'm
and
gonna
I.
sign off.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
We'll see you guys.
Bye.
Good night.
Okay. Good night.
Good
Darren
night.
and myself
Good night, Mike.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
formed a little corporation, and basically we are supposed to be in business. Actually, April 18th was supposed to be our very first radio auction, but we decided not even to advertise because of what's going on with COVID-19 in the world. So
The look ahead and the hope is that in the near future, once this is calmed down, depending on when it calms down, we will shortly thereafter be hosting our first auction, which is shaping up to be bigger and better than we had even planned for it to be. And we're hoping that this becomes a destination, and this is going to be a regular recurring event in New Jersey, the likes of which New Jersey has not yet seen with any regularity.
we are planning to hold the auction at InfoAge in 9032A. And like I said, we were going to start advertising about a month ago for the first auction, which was going to be about 300 lots or so. But we're probably going to wait another month and see how things shape up. And if this starts to clear up and wind down, we'll be advertising for the summer auction, which should be 400 or 500 lots of antique electronic paraphernalia.
In addition, every auction gets its stuff from somewhere. So the other side of the auction service is that we're going to be offering collection liquidation, and this is something else that probably may eventually interest club members and others.
Okay. I'll watch it with you some. I don't have to be there right every minute. Hello.
This is Harry, and I have one comment. And it is, Rich mentioned that the summer swap is July 25th, perhaps.
Correct.
So, just we'll have to work out schedules. That's all.
Well, I believe schedules were made out before the coronavirus hit. Aaron, John, you want to explain that? You do have permission with the Colonel?
Oh, yeah, we already worked out things with Mike Ruane and Gloria in terms of scheduling. In fact, Harry, if you'd like to know the date that we're planning on for July, it is supposed to be the Saturday before the summer swap meet.
The week before. Well, it's a very different kind of a thing.
Well, and of course, this is tentative, depending on what all happens with this corona nightmare and winding down and stuff like that. Obviously, we're going to call it if we feel we're going to be auctioning to an empty room.
Or if we feel we're going to be risking people's
Right. We don't want to endanger people, and we also don't want to, jeopardize the auction. So whatever is best for everyone, we will do. But this will be happening. And whether it happens in July or September as the inaugural, it's going to be happening, and it's going to be happening with regularity.
We had been planning on 3 auctions this year.
All right, you fellas were thinking, you touched on it just a minute ago, the idea that perhaps I'll take the liberty to say that you'd like to become the Estes of the East, and
No,
maybe.
we want to be better than that.
Oh, all right, there we go. Like to hear that.
We were trying to avoid naming names and and taking names, but yeah, that's the idea is to
All right, and just the idea that people could contact you for, like you say, liquidations of their collection.
Oh, they absolutely can, and
already are.
And already are. We'll have advertising out for that in the very near future, and know that the auction, when it's going to take place, will be advertised pretty much in all the usual places, including electric radio and online and QRZ and all
Will be on Auction Zip.
Auction Zip and all the remaining publications that we can muster.
Sounds fantastic. Sounds great. Can you tell us where the auction house will be located?
At InfoAge Science and Learning Center.
Fantastic.
Building 9032A, where we hold some of our meetings. We're going to use that as the venue, Larry.
How convenient. Lovely. Totally look forward to it. Got a lot of cleaning up to do.
And our auctions will not be limited to radios per se, though. I mean, it's antique electronics, radios, audio, tubes, worthy vintage computers, so on and so forth. If it's for telephone equipment, if it's worthy, it'll be there, and hopefully we'll have something for everybody. And I can tell you, the first one's looking good.
Congratulations on setting it up.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, does anyone else have anything to chat about? David, what was our final count, Dave?
67, I think.
At one point, we had I counted 61 individual people on. We're at 40 right now.
I'm showing 41, Dave.
I'm on there twice.
Oh, okay. That's why.
At one time, I thought I saw 63.
It did say 63 earlier.
Yeah, well, it was -2 because both Dave and Professor Mike had 2 connections, I believe.
Yep.
You got to watch it as Morris County. They'll stand up and try to vote twice.
I missed the cookies.
Well,
pretty good count. It's first time out, and our average attendance at any of our meetings is usually between 40 and 50, I'll say, or 40 and 45. So actually, it's a pretty damn good count, considering that nobody had to pay any tolls or travel or go.
And I have to say that this, we fought like hell to get back on YouTube. This is vastly superior to YouTube, in my opinion.
I'm just fearful of the bandwidth and everybody else on it.
Yeah. How many people can say that they've got the vacuum tubes in their chain here?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's working out pretty well. And you probably have more people, Richard, using the bandwidth of, Zoom and the internet in general right now as they're cooped up in their homes.
Well, that's what I mean, John. And all the schools, universities.
And they're working from home, too. They're not just,
Well, I was on a Zoom meeting. Tesla Wardenclyffe Center had a meeting yesterday, and it actually stumbled in the middle of the meeting, and Zoom sent them an email and a message to Wardenclyffe and apologized during the meeting that they temporarily ran out of bandwidth. But I think bandwidth isn't one of those things where they just make more. I don't know how bad it is right now, but this thing is working remarkably well. I mean, there's no latency here at all. Everybody's picture looks like high-def video. I keep saying it's really nice living in the future.
Well,
Yeah,
right now down here in Virginia, they've actually doubled all of the homeowners' bandwidth for no additional cost.
Nice. That won't happen up here.
Well, I have the lowest tier of optimum service in the house here, and I'm running two Zoom connections from my desk, and my wife was running one before, and there was nothing stuttering here at all. It's like magic.
I'm running this over 25-year-old DSL technology, and
wow,
and you know, the clarity on your end, my camera's horrible, but you guys look perfect.
Yeah,
And
well, your
there's no
sound is good, Darren. Your sound is perfect. Your camera looks like you might have an original Philo Farnsworth camera.
Well, I've got a Western Electric microphone here, so I mean that would sort of match.
That makes up for it.
Hey, from up here in Maine, things are going good. I'm on backup power from a storm we had yesterday. But my question is directed to either John or Darren regarding the auction that they're going to put together. And that would be, how far are you willing to travel?
How big is your estate? How big is the collection?
It's not my estate, but it's a gentleman that contacted me a couple of weeks ago. I have seen part of it already. He has roughly 150 tabletop pieces, probably another dozen consoles, various amount of test equipment, and thousands of tubes.
And where is this?
It's up here in Maine.
Anything's possible.
Yeah, you know, let's put it this way, if it's the right stuff and, you know, we're interested and we can come to an agreement over commission, absolutely.
All right, I'll talk to the gentleman that's taking care of the estate. I told him I'd get back to him. I'd rather, you know, take it to people I know like you, rather than contact Schulman's or Estes. So let me talk to him and see what he thinks. Can you send me an email with some information, or do you have a website, anything like that?
Our website is JD, John, as in John and Darren, auctions, LLC.com. Or sorry, yeah, that's it.
So it's jdauctionsllc.com.
Yep.
Got it. Okay.
And there is, if you go on there, there's a contact for email and also our business phone number.
Okay.
So if you want to have that person contact us directly.
Okay.
I'm going to try something. I'm going to try something real quick here. Oh, I can't. I was going to try to share the screen and show the website real quick, but it's not letting me.
That's okay. I'll contact him. Yeah, the gentleman, the fellow lives in New Hampshire. His father died about a year ago, and the estate is just a few miles down the road from me. So, like I said, I've seen some of it. I don't think any of it has been worked on. It has classic dust, and some of these things are in pieces. So yeah, I did explain to him that he's probably not going to get what his father originally invested in these things.
What part of Maine, just out of curiosity?
You familiar? Well, let's see. I'm about 65, 70 miles north of Portland.
All right, that's a general idea. Okay.
Okay. You know where the state capital of Augusta is? Or state capital of Maine, Augusta?
I've got an idea.
All right, I'm 20 miles east of that.
Okay. Well, like I said, we'll discuss it.
Okay. Where'd the rest of the screen go?
I don't know what happened.
I'm trying to put the website up there, but for some reason it must be dark over there right now.
Dave, if somebody can allow me to share, I can show it.
Hey, Darren?
Yeah.
Bill.
Yeah, Bill.
That was jdauctionllc.com?
Yes, JD Auctions with an S.
Okay.
We're going to have more than one, yeah.
Okay.
Or like I said, I have the page up if somebody would let me share it.
Yeah, I have the page up too, but it's not sharing. So
Who's the host?
I've got the host right now, but it's not sharing. Yeah, well, I don't know. Something's not working right. Sorry.
Well, that's why I'm saying
Just
if you
put it
could
in the
enable,
chat window and people can click on it later.
if you can enable me, I'll see if I can. That's a good idea too. Hold on. That's a very good idea.
We can just shove it up on the reflector.
Yeah, that's true too.
I mean, you know, we
now.
don't need to share it right now.
Here, I just did. Yeah, I just sent
okay,
it.
I see.
Yeah, yeah. Now everybody should be able to see.
There you go. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So, and if you go to the website and you go to the upper left-hand corner, there's a contact link. Click on it. You'll find the business phone number and you'll find our email.
Okay.
So, you know, we were hoping to announce this under different circumstances.
Well, the cat's out of the bag now, so.
Well, this
Wish
is
you
your
luck.
captive audience. What are you kidding?
Well, I guess everybody can get excited about it. Dave, you're losing your background there.
Oh, okay.
Good looking website.
We have Matt Reynolds to thank for it.
Yeah, he's our webmaster.
Good job, Matt.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Matt.
Thanks.
I mean, really, I have to thank Matt. He's been very helpful, you know, to Darren and I with regarding setting up a website. You know, we understand the auction and estate sale business, but when it comes to building a website, not so much.
Okay, Dave, thanks. I'm going to bail.
I also
Bye,
have
Al.
Dave to thank for getting.
All right, Al.
All right, Al. So
Catch you
long.
later, Al.
Have a good evening. Be safe.
Good night, Al.
I also have Dave to thank for helping me.
Good night, Al.
With the phone number. So.
So, John and Darren, before we bail out of this, you have some sort of contract, written agreement type of thing?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, everything is on above board. Contracts, written agreements, pre-agreed. It's either concession, consignment, or buyout, depending on how much stuff and what the expectation is, and that's all the stuff that gets hashed out when it's time to do it.
Think of a loft of a 24-foot square 2-car garage.
Yeah, we've seen those.
All right.
That's pretty small.
All right, guys, I'm going to bail.
Small.
See you.
Yeah.
Been great.
See you later.
I enjoyed this. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Hey, everybody. Owen.
Great night. Great meeting. Thanks.
Good night, folks. Thanks much. Great meeting. Great lecture, too.
So I guess no diner then, huh? Not this time.
Hey, wait a second. I got some great hamburgers just had from the grill. They're really good.
I may go downstairs to the bar and fix myself another cocktail.
I'm going to dinner right now, but it's not the diner.
I see Tom Cawley up here. Hey, Tom, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Your radio's fixed, buddy.
Oh, thanks. When am I going to see you, July?
Oh, eventually, and it's going to be real cheap. The only thing that was wrong was a tube.
Oh, no kidding. All right. Well,
Probably just needs a tube.
probably just needs a tube. Probably just needs a belt.
Looks like Tom's in bed already.
Nah, I'm relaxing in my lazy boy. I'm a lazy boy. It's named after me. And by the way, people in Bergen County like the stores closed on Sunday. And I don't want to pump my own gas either. If you live near Route 17, you want the stores closed on Sunday so you could go someplace.
Hey, Rich, when does the auction start?
What was that, Phil?
Tonight?
No auction tonight?
Oh, I saw those radios on the table over there behind his head.
They're all for sale. Make me an offer I can't refuse.
Is that Phil Vortis? Is that Phil?
Wow, I've heard my name a lot of ways, but that's a new one.
Yeah. I think, are you the guy that fixed my 45 RPM RCA player?
The only one.
Probably.
Yeah, you lived over by a lake.
A lake.
No, maybe that was someone else, but no. Did you write a book on 45 RPM players?
Yeah.
Okay, I got the book, and I think you might have restored my 1957 that I got for Christmas RCA small little portable phono. Sure.
It's still working?
Yeah, it is. And you probably restored it 15 years ago.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah, Phil's stuff comes with a 30-day or 30-minute warranty, whichever comes first.
I thought it was 30 seconds or 30 feet.
One more question, Dave. Did I see 2 pinball machines behind you?
No, you must have been hallucinating.
Oh, they sort of look like pinball machines. I didn't know you had those as well. Yes, my gosh. Oh, is that just is that okay? You have 2 pinball machines then, huh?
They look familiar? No, those are yours.
They are mine. What the hell?
It looks like
going on? Those are my 2 pinball machines. No wonder they look familiar.
It looks like the playing positions are spaced 6 feet apart, so that would qualify for.
Oh my God!
Social distancing. Huh?
You must have photographed the inside of my house. What are you going to do? You're going to loot the place?
That's when you invited Matt and I up into your game room.
Yeah, a lot of things are missing right after that. Yeah, that's pretty neat. Yeah. Gee whiz, I thought it looked familiar. I'm saying something's wrong. I'm starting to hallucinate.
I was messing with you.
All I had was coffee here. I didn't know. Good Lord.
Cheap high.
Well, it's funny that collectively, because of all these weird connections, you got at least 3 or 4 different car clubs too. So you got an MG club, you got a Triumph club, and a DeLorean club, all on the same radio club call.
That is weird, yes, because I didn't know those 2 things kind of mixed. And also the Antique Automobile Club of America with Bill Pritchett. He was on earlier. And,
yeah, and also the 1967 Buick Club too, as well.
Oh, really?
Well, there's 2 people that belong to that, John.
And Keith, remember I bumped into you over at that the car club seminar a while ago. Over at what's his name's house when he was doing the carburetor rebuilding workshop.
Oh, Nick O'Donoghue.
Nick O'Donoghue, yeah.
Yes,
so,
yes.
There's a lot of cross pollination through the weird collector community.
Well, I'll tell you what, the guy tonight, it was Greek to me. I assume that's probably as high a level as you go in this club.
Your camera's upside down, Darren.
Darren's got a great DSL connection. It defies gravity.
I think I'm just getting high from all this high technology. Well, I don't even know how this happened here. Hold on. Let's see if I can try to figure out what happened.
Hey, I got a bone to pick.
That's weird. The camera didn't move.
All right, what's your phone?
Hey, I can see guys hoarding toilet paper, but I can't see you guys hoarding matzah. I went to the store today and they didn't have any.
Oh, here we go.
What's the deal? What's the deal?
You're in the wrong neighborhood, Marvin.
Couldn't find any Ritz crackers.
I don't even want to speculate. This could get really weird.
I'll tell you what's weird is when you can't find any bathroom cleaner. Sharon mentioned that to me. She can't find any bathroom cleaner. I said I've been washing my hands so much every time I use the toilet, I'm disinfecting it.
These are strange days we're living in.
I tell you what, my local grocery store up here has everything.
Yeah, but that's because you live in a good state.
Everything except for one thing. The governor of Pennsylvania shut liquor stores down.
Oh.
And last week they got the liquor store's website up and they were going to start taking orders and delivering. It crashed in 20 minutes. And that was last Thursday and it's still down.
Time to start growing potatoes.
You know, the funny
I'm just
part.
curious, why did they make it essential businesses in Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York?
Because they lost almost, unlike New Jersey, Connecticut, and New York, which make money on their liquor programs, Pennsylvania the state owns all the stores. They lost over $4 million on it last year.
Yep.
I normally shop late at night or early in the morning because I don't like crowded stores. So I went to did my shopping last week at 10 o'clock at night at ShopRite, and not a person in the store. You have to get close to anybody.
Well,
now they changed it.
Too young to do shopping at ShopRite in the morning now.
Well, no, I'm okay. Sometimes I would go on Saturdays. Now they changed it. Now you cannot shop at 10 o'clock at night, and they want everybody to get together at the same. It doesn't make sense. I can't figure that one out.
Back in the early 80s when I was a bachelor, I used to go out with the boys to the bar, and then I'd get home about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning and go out to this local food town. They were open 24 hours. I'd do all my shopping at 2:30 in the morning, get my week's groceries done in 10 minutes.
Well,
I'm
Dave,
sorry, I didn't mean to put everybody to sleep.
No, Dave. Yeah, Dave.
Good night, Bob.
I didn't know what you meant when you said I seen that room before. I thought you were talking about my den where I'm sitting, and I just still can't get over you got my room behind you there. I mean, and that I couldn't figure out. I was thinking that looks familiar.
Yeah, I was just messing with you, see if you're paying attention.
Yeah, that's something.
I got a question.
Dave come on there, and I said, what is this? What's going on?
I've got a question about the virtual background. I was trying to put myself down at InfoAge, and when I tried to do it, everything went crazy, and I got a broken up picture, and it said something. Do I need a green piece of felt hanging behind me, like a chroma key?
You need a green screen behind you if you have an older computer. I broke with my usual pattern of being unfathomably cheap, and I bought a current generation iPad, which will actually do a somewhat acceptable green screen without a green screen behind you. And it's driving me crazy because I do not understand how they do that.
Yeah.
But
now, if you can look, I'm like shimmering. I got partial background, but it will not let me.
Yeah. Well, you can put up anything that's not detailed behind you, and it might work better. Or you can put a green screen up. There's a button you press someplace, and it says, I have a green screen. And then it does a real good job. Almost, you could almost be a weatherman in your spare time.
Yeah, I have to find it. I have one somewhere.
Like, yeah, Joe's got a green screen behind him. Should work great.
Painted wall.
Dave, is that a certain app? I've got a Mac here, a Mac ProBook, and Apple. So probably the same as your iPad. That has something on it.
They all have it's built into the program. It runs on any platform. Look under the little 3 dots where it says more, and later on, and you'll see there's some options in there.
Oh, okay, thanks.
It's fun. There's a lot of goofy things to play around with in here. Anyway, yeah. Well, I enjoyed this. I thought this was great.
I got a question for you. I thought this meeting only would work for about 40 minutes, and then it was going to cut off.
No, what they do is they're brilliant marketers. This thing works on the freemium principle. Anybody can use it for free, but it cuts you off at 40 minutes, which I guess they figured out that most meetings last about 50 minutes to an hour. And the first or second time you get cut off abruptly with no notice in the midst of the meeting, you buy a subscription.
Oh.
But the program itself works better than anything I have ever seen. It's just absolutely stunning to me how well this works.
Yeah, I mean, this is my first time tonight.
What was the problem?
I'm absolutely amazed.
What was the problem on Wednesday night?
Probably that it was a new, they updated the program and put a security patch in, and they probably introduced a bug that they then had to go find and fix.
I've been astonished by the way this works. I am absolutely.
I feel like Captain Kirk here. It's amazing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've seen them try to do this stuff at work before, and it usually winds up crashing and burning and stuttering and jerking. And
I've been trying to. I've been doing one form of this or another since 1990, and it didn't work at all back in 1990. And then lately, it's worked great if you're an enterprise customer and you want to pay $1,000 or $50,000 a month for the services. Matt could tell you more about that, but for $15 a month, this is unfreaking believable.
Well, what I can tell you is Google, I don't think, is too happy about it, because I've gotten memo after memo. Not that it doesn't really involve me, it involves the teaching staff from the school, but I keep getting memo after memo that the Department of Education in New York does not sanction the use of Zoom, and it is unacceptable that people are using it, and they are to use Google Hangouts, and it just keeps coming back, and it seems the more people try to use Zoom, the more they re-emphasize that they have to use Google Hangouts.
There are some serious concerns about security with Zoom, but a lot of it is the same as with Google. You know, they're collecting information on you, and they're going to show you targeted ads. They were sharing information about you with Facebook, even if you didn't have a Facebook account. There were serious concerns, but nothing that I thought were deal killers. Everybody's got all of my information and probably all of yours already, so it doesn't make a whole lot of difference at this point.
What is this?
New York City school system also had banned
what is it?
the past 2 weeks.
We had everybody talking at once.
I'm sorry. What is this program? I know it's not Zoom.
Yes, it is Zoom.
Pardon me?
It is Zoom.
Oh, it is. Okay. Okay. And Phil? Phil? There you go. That's your book, right?
Yeah, thanks for the advertising.
You're welcome. So I got a celebrity on here. That's a pretty good book, actually. I actually bought
Mine
it.
signed.
Excellent book.
Well, we got 2 celebrities on here because probably nobody, not too many people know. Keith is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and he's invented a couple of things that you probably enjoyed in your life, right?
They tell me I'm in the Hall of Fame, but that's about all I know. Yeah.
And what did you invent?
Well, I developed. No one person usually invents anything. I developed Skittles and Starburst.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's famous. That's better than what most people do.
All I know is that I literally went from driving a rusted Honda to going into, and never had a new car, to going to a Mercedes dealer and buying a 300 class E-Class cash when that happened.
All from Skittles, huh?
Yeah, Skittles. Yes, thank you. I pretty
Taste the rainbow.
Hey, Dave.
Hello.
This is Bill. Can you hear me?
I am here.
Okay. You talk about privacy issues with the Zoom here. Have you tried using it through a VPN?
I think I haven't heard anybody say that made any difference.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
And also, you run through a VPN. I imagine this is a lot of bandwidth here. VPN really slows you down sometimes. But I don't know. That's something else I'm going to have to go look up now. I've gone from being completely ignorant about 2.5 or 3 weeks ago on this subject. I was the guy who couldn't get into Zoom meetings 3 weeks ago because I wasn't smart enough to do it. And it was like how I learned how to ski. They took me to the top of the hill and they pushed me, and that's how I learned how to ski. That's how I feel with Zoom here.
Dave, you haven't talked about the recording, how well it records also.
Well, we're making a recording of the meeting, and it'll be available on YouTube. it won't be, I guess it won't be quite as good as the recordings that I make with the big professional camera at the meetings, but it will be entirely accurate, adequate. I'm thrilled with this. I think it's great. I'm hoping to figure out how we can continue to use this even after we start meeting in person again. This is great.
Well, I suggested that we use it for our e-board meetings, our mini e-board meetings.
And not driving an hour and a half down to InfoAge would be one of my favorite things.
Yep, me too.
But yeah, there's no reason we should stop doing this after we're allowed to go outside. It's nice to be able to have this sort of stuff. You don't get to talk for 15 minutes and sit, then run home because it's late. You can chill and talk about stuff without any real structure, which is cool.
I like your wall, Matt. You have the only branding in the evening here.
Yeah.
I
my
like that
subtle
sewer pipe
branding.
in the background. Gives it a nice touch.
Yeah, that's my closet.
Yeah.
Matt's the Art Carney of the club here.
I've been working on I don't have all my cool hidden radio club shit in here. I was packing all that stuff up. So this is my corporate cage where I spend 40 hours a week. So it doesn't look nearly as cool as my radio rooms that you guys are all sitting in.
And people get to drop in from Maine, and we had a member from Arkansas the other day. I mean, this is pretty good stuff.
Yeah, let's just hope that it stays free, though. That's the only thing.
Well, we're actually paying for it, but it's so cheap that it's not an issue.
Oh, I didn't know that.
$15 a month is cheaper than renting a hall.
It's for $15. Do you know how much we all spent driving? If we drove to Princeton tonight, if you added up our gas.
Well, it depended on the price of fuel.
$10 a barrel soon, I hear.
$10 a gallon.
Yeah, well, hey,
Traffic on Route 1.
Not now.
No,
No
not
traffic now.
No traffic now. They can open the stores on Sunday in Bergen County. There's no traffic.
But
I paid the most in gas and tolls.
Yeah.
I was on the turnpike yesterday. There's nobody on it.
Yeah. But I'll look forward to integrating this into the meetings. I'm not sure how yet, but if you want to go to InfoAge and go to the meeting, that's obviously better. But if you're in Maine or if you're homesick or whatever, this is pretty damn good.
Yeah,
Thanks for the effort,
I
Dave.
tried to tune into the meetings up here in Hawley, Pennsylvania a few times, Dave, and with my internet service here, it really didn't work. This is working great.
I don't know how they do it. It's magic.
Hey, Dave, I'm on backup power tonight, and it's sketchy with the internet right now. So this is terrific. Clear screen, no jacking around. This is really perfect.
Next best thing to be in there. Somebody
Absolutely.
said that.
Yep. Yeah. Just bring in smell-o-vision.
Yeah.
Joe, is
Phil, I have a question because I hate mangling people's names. Apparently I did. How do you pronounce your last name?
Vortis.
Vortis. Vortis? Does that sound about right?
It's on the front cover of the book.
Yeah. So this book right here. Yeah.
All right. I don't know. It's Greek to me.
Yeah, my father used to pronounce it Vortis.
Oh, really?
So the only thing missing here is the cookies.
Yeah.
Around that, huh?
You got to brew your own radio coffee.
I got to go brew a sleep. This has been great. Thank you all. See you soon.
Take care.
Night, Larry.
Take care, brother.
Take care, Larry. It's good
Larry.
to see you.
All right, guy.
Thanks.
Hey, I gotta
All
go.
right,
too.
everybody. Stay safe, everyone.
Which of the radios behind you are for the auction, Rich?
Night, everybody.
Night.
Good to see you, Matt, and Dave again.
Nice seeing you again.
Yeah.
Good to have you in the club.
Well, thank you. It's fun. Yeah, it's fun.
Nice model, John.
Dave, we got to talk. We're going to do something with harps next Friday.
I was looking for a quick show and tell, and that was the nearest thing I could grab.
Wait a second. Just wait a second here. I have the cookies. See.
I'm looking into getting a
Your
web
camera doesn't have enough resolution to see the cookies. Sorry, Darren.
Hey, this camera says Gateway 2000 on the side of it.
Oh boy, they put QQ plates on that so you can drive it down the road.
What's that? I think that's all that's left of the Gateway, but that's what the camera says.
You know, Darren, maybe I should tag that and put it in the auction.
If you want crap cameras, here's one with two megapixels. That's it.
That's very similar to what I have, but the one I have is like the beige color, even older.
And this one can't be accepted by Zoom. It won't even go on Zoom. The software is too out of date.
I think
I think I'm going to grab one wholesale off the Chinese vending site. I'm not sure yet. Everything these days is contact supplier. They don't say they actually have it. So hopefully they didn't run out of cameras. Maybe they were giving them away with face masks. I don't know.
Hey, Tom Corley, those record holders you got behind you, are they all filled with records? You're on mute.
You just said they were in your newsletter.
Yeah, they are. They're full. Absolutely. They're organized
Sometimes
by
I take
decade.
liberties, you know.
No, they're organized by decade. And then like novelty, country.
I mean, that looks like a lot more decades than when records existed.
Well, that's 50s, that's 60s, that's 70s, that's 80s.
Oh, okay. There's not one for each.
Yeah, and then there's more. There's more. It's about 10,000, 45.
That's it. I'm coming over to play pinball. I see those machines.
Yeah, those are some nice pinball machines. Hey, Phil.
Yeah.
I took apart the handle of an EY3. Did they use a rubber band for the tension on those handles? You know how it springs back? Because I found a deteriorated rubber band, and in order to fix it, I used a hairband from my daughter I found in the basement floor. But it worked. Yeah, there's a rubber band inside it. I thought there was probably a spring or something, but it was a rubber band.
I'll have to look. I don't recall, but I wouldn't.
Inside the handle,
maybe
yeah.
that was a cost reduction for RCA.
I guess.
I think they did on the later models.
This one is like a
probably
51.
3 or 4 times over the years.
Yeah, because it was not working. It was not retracting, and I opened it up, and it was a deteriorated rubber band inside.
I'm pretty sure they did that, Tom. I've got a couple of spare handles down in the basement, and they have disintegrated rubber band sticking out of them.
Oh, yeah, so that was probably what they did. It works. Like I said, I found a hairband.
Linear tracking turntable with a rubber band.
Yeah, right? This one is a 1951. It has a metal turntable. I was kind of surprised. I haven't found too many with metal turntables. Though. Yeah, the black. I'm really getting to the pile now at this point.
What's that, an old Polaroid there?
Darren's in deep concentration there.
All right, folks, I'm going to sign out. So have a good night, everybody.
Good night, guys. Thanks for fixing my radio.
Good night, Bob.
Night, Bob.
Good night, everybody.
Yeah, no, I was saying perhaps this would be an improvement to the video.
Maybe.
Hey, Richard Lee.
I'm here.
Yeah, thanks very much for letting me borrow your book about Brooklyn. That
Ridge in particular.
That was a real fun read for me.
That brought back memories, right?
Yeah, and I figured I'd bring it back to you to the next meeting, but that might be next year. Who knows?
Hope not that. What What years did you remember? You're just a little older than me, Phil.
I'll tell you, almost every page in that book had some mention of something that I remember from my neighborhood. They even
That's a
talked
good
about,
sign.
yeah, they talked about my street, the stores that were on the corner, that things like that.
You lived in a better section of Bay Ridge than I did.
Yeah, that was Fort Hamilton was a pretty nice area.
Yeah, the Hamilton House. I remember after every funeral we would go there. I got another book, actually, I had gotten for my mother, because she was brought up in Park Slope. Unfortunately, she never got to read it, but it was a nice read anyway.
It was kind of a strange way to write a book, though. All it is people mentioning things.
Anecdotes, yeah.
You mean like an oral history, I think they call that, right?
Yeah, well, anecdotes.
It's like a bunch of us here just taking whatever we're saying and write it down in a book.
Well, I think they've done that for different neighborhoods, even in New Jersey too.
Hey, I don't know what's wrong here. I just put my 3D glasses on, but you're all still flat.
I'm going half.
Okay,
Tom,
yeah.
you're
Okay, I'm-
killing
I'm-
me with that background there too, because I have not found one of those in the wild yet. You're
I
just
have them
killing
all.
me.
I have them all. I have them all. I got more too.
All right, I'm signing
Just print
off.
one, Dave.
Yeah.
All right, Bill. Go out to the pool and have a cocktail before you go to sleep.
You can't. The pool is locked up. Keep us out.
Florida man.
Say what?
Florida man.
Yeah.
Have you done any Florida man stuff yet?
Not yet. No, we're keeping it out.
He's the Tiger King.
Is it true you don't have any radios there to fix?
Oh, no radios here. No.
Oh my God! How can you exist for the next few?
Boy,
months?
I heard it was tough in Florida, but I had no idea.
All right. Good night, guys.
Good
Good night.
All right, good night. Good night, Bill.
Good night.
Good night.
All right. Well, I'm in a quandary because I don't want to end the meeting, but I still have not had dinner, and I think if I leave the meeting, it will end.
All right.
But wait, Dave, we could.
No, it won't.
I'd say we could all go to a diner, but they're all closed. I don't.
Well, I guess this was the diner. Just didn't have the food. Conversation, but no food.
No food. Yeah.
Which is sort of an improvement on some of the diners we've been to.
Well.
I don't know about anybody else, but I got my money's worth. I'll see you guys. Good night.
All right, Tom.
Good night,
Good night,
Tom.
Tom.
Good night, guys.
All right, 10:30, 10:25. I'll say good night too.
All right.
All right. Talk
Good
to
night,
you.
Hey, Rich, before you go,
Fairly well.
All right.
A lot of
Matt,
fun.
are you still on?
I am. Why?
I was just going to show you something. So it's
Got your printer running?
I got the printer running. It's about this is about the fourth or fifth one. Been except for the power failure, it's been going pretty well.
That's
Except
cool.
I'm reading stuff online. They said you're not supposed to let them run overnight because they'll burn your house down. So now I'm wondering.
Well, if you live in your house, you'll know if it's on fire. So.
Well, yeah. The question is soon enough. I don't know how serious that is, and how whether I should shut it off at night.
So put it in a tent outside.
One of the things we did when we got your printer was put that MOSFET board in there, so that'll help it so it won't catch on fire.
Well, they said you're supposed to put it in a metal box, so I do have a metal box, but I'm not doing that tonight.
Dave,
Well, when I first got mine, I used to put the smoke alarm on top of it, so I figured if it caught on fire, I'd hear faster. But I didn't pick up on that.
I've got an answer. I've got the answer. Yeah, I've got the answer. build an asbestos box for it.
Well, I
and
happen
what
to
you
know
do
where
is
I get a lot of asbestos from the old CRT rebuilding material that we inherited. So
right,
yeah.
and then you build an asbestos box for it. Make sure when you cut the asbestos, you make a lot of dust.
All right. Well, I guess
Well, consider
let's.
he's making face masks. That's probably not a good idea. Sorry, what? Someone said my name?
A 3D printer will catch on fire. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, anything that's hot will catch on fire. If it breaks, your stove can catch on fire. I mean, anything can catch on fire.
Apparently, the filament's flammable. I heard. I don't know.
I mean, if it's melting at 230, how much hotter does it have to get before it actually catches on fire? I mean,
most plastics will burn if you get them hot enough. It's just a matter of what the flash point is.
right, but I'm saying is that in order for them to extrude out, they have to be anywhere from 200 to 230 Celsius anyway. So, I mean, they're already hot. So,
Well, potentially
it's like a hot glue
because
gun.
of failure. You know, in other words, a stove.
Well, I have
it's made of metal.
Right. I mean, the electronics can catch on fire, but they're in a metal box too. So, I mean,
this is true.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I've heard different. I mean, things about them, but you know, that's why you have controls on them to stop them and stuff. So, you know, I've got a webcam set on mine and a VPN connection to it. So I've went to work and went shopping and stuff on it because you can shut it off if it's going haywire. You know, obviously when you're sleeping, it's a little bit more of a gamble. But like I said, just put a smoke alarm next to it. And if you're home and if it's going off, then there you go. I mean,
Dave, you have a fireplace there. Set it up in the fireplace.
Well, yeah, that would work, wouldn't it?
And if you had a fire, it would be in the right place.
Right.
Well, I was thinking on Matt's idea, right? You put the smoke detector there, but you go a step further. Suppose it is unattended and all of the methods fail. What would be reasonably reliable would be you design a circuit. When it hears a loud noise, such as the smoke detector, it snaps the relay and kills the power to add a measure of safety. It might still have a little something going on in there, but it can't keep heating because it don't have electricity no more. Not exactly sure how you would rig that up, but I think it will work like a charm.
There's a couple people that have done fun stuff like that. So one of the things, I don't have my camera set up where I can show it to you, but they build these enclosures for these things out of these IKEA tables. You just stack them on top of each other and you make an enclosure that way. And some of the people have made those sort of, I don't know what the technical term is, but the old school extinguishers you'd put over like a grill, you know, in a restaurant, like the bombs that kind of just melt and extinguish.
Fire grenades.
Yeah, so people have put those inside the enclosure so it actually burns up. It'll, you know, make a fire grenade melt or whatever. So the people that own these printers and that are smarter than us with them are pretty damn crafty and have solved most of these problems one way or another to better or worse degrees. So
I think the idea of putting it in the fireplace is probably the simplest thing. Either that or put it outside, put it in a tent or something.
You can't. They have to be more temperature controlled.
Hey, you know,
Flame
you gotta
detection.
be careful with the smoke detector because if the thing heats up first, it might melt the smoke detector and it won't go off.
Yeah.
And the other thing is you don't need a circuit to sense the sound of the smoke detector. All you got to do is hook a sensitive relay up to the power supply feeding the sun alert and the smoke detector, and that'll trigger the relay coil.
Or just don't worry about it. I mean, how many times have you heard it in the news about, I mean, you've probably heard a million times of people burning down their garage when they cook the frying a turkey. Yeah, how many times have you heard in the news about a printer burning down a house? I mean, it's not
With
that.
no luck, Matt, you'll be the first.
If I'm lucky, I'll be here too, so I don't have to worry about it.
Well, I think you got to worry more about exploding refrigerators than the 3D printers.
A lot of them are also in their own case for that reason. You know, we have an open gantry style one, but there are some that are self-contained for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, we have them at the school. We have a few of them, but the ones that are in cases are in plastic cases that are combustible. They've run those things overnight many, many, many times, and there's never been an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I've had mine running for 3 days straight before. It's been a while since I've done that, so it's, you know, the bigger risk is it just whatever the hell you're doing fails and you wasted the time. It's usually not that much of a danger.
What are you printing out that takes 3 days?
Anything that's bigger than a few inches takes hours. So that thing that Dave was showing is one of those things to make a makeshift face shield for the pandemic. That thing's only about the size of one of those hair visors you'd put on your head. That takes 4 to 8 hours to print. And that's with it being 30% full. So it's not a solid block of plastic. So just with 30% hollow, it takes 4 to 8 hours just to make that. So imagine anything big with any amount of infill, it takes hours and hours and hours to do. Obviously, if you have a better printer or a more expensive one, they can go faster, but the faster they go, if you have a cheaper printer, the less accurate, you know, it skips and stuff or sputters like a hot glue, you would string or whatever. So,
or you could just use a rubber band or some duct tape to fasten the visor to your head.
These 3D printers have come a long way. I remember the first ones that we had gotten at the school. The damn thing cost $25,000, and it used a powder, and it would inject like a cyanoacrylate was what the head would spray, and it would spray it on the powder, and then you had to wash away or blow away the excess powder that didn't have the glue, and the stuff would crumble in your hands. I mean, they've come a million miles on these things.
Yeah, I mean, ours were $250 4 years ago or 3 years ago, you know, and so obviously imagine you can buy it, you know, you can buy them for $100 now. You can buy them for $5,000, but since we're closer to the cheaper scale than the expensive scale, that's why we have more problems.
When Mike Littman first joined the club, I was visiting him down at Princeton one time, and he was showing me around, and he was showing me a $50,000 3D printer that they had, which I'm sure was not as good as the ones that they're selling for $250 now. But he said, you know, within 5 years, he said, this is going to be $99 under your Christmas tree. And sure enough, he was right.
Well, look at the
Can you see that? My camera cable is not long enough, but that's my printer. You can see that it's kind of in an enclosure box that's just made out of these two $10 IKEA end tables. They're stacked on top of each other, and there's a couple plastic couplers to hold the tables on top of each other. You know, so it's self-contained in a way, but it's self-contained in basically a particle board cardboard box, so it's not fire safe, but it stops like papers and stuff from falling on it, or, you know, things like that.
Well, to you know, use vacuum tubes in a sensor would be easy. Hamamatsu makes ultraviolet detectors that they use to see flames before you actually have true ignition. And they have a very narrow spectrum of light. So you can use it in a room with regular lighting. It's impervious, in other words, to visible light, and just detects the UV light that flame creates.
And to going into the weeds a little bit on them, but a lot of them have what's called how they work, right? So they're a hot glue gun. There's a metal there's something heating up the plastic. They have thermistors on them to tell what temperature they're on, you know. So that's how it regulates what temperature it is. And a lot of the more advanced ones with software have a feature called thermal runaway detection. So if they see that it can't stay at a specific temperature, it'll just shut itself off anyway. So unless the box burns up and that software fails, then obviously that could fail too. But it's like, all right, well, anything can fail. Just how far do you want to take it? So I've actually modified mine so it does that.
Cool.
But yeah, I mean, the cool thing about them is you just play with them. I mean, you print stuff for your printer for the first several weeks of owning one to make it better, to make spare parts, and then you start doing what you actually plan to do with it after that. I've actually used that to learn more about electronics, believe it or not. So I don't know if you see it again. So that thing that looks like a, oh shit, hold on. I'm trying to get the damn angle right. And I can't. There. It's right at the damn frame of the table there. So it's kind of hard to see it. But there's this thing that looks kind of like a cigarette, like an electronic metal cigarette somewhere on the carriage. And what that is an inductive sensor. And the way these things work is there's a limit switch. When it goes down far enough, it says, all right, that's where home is for Z and all that. So it's just a physical contact switch. Well, a lot of people figured out that these things warp, that they're not level. So they put a sensor on the bed to tell where the home is on every spot on the bed. So it measures in 9 different spots. So I learned how to do like signaling diodes to do the on off from the motherboards. I've never done it before. So because you had to do a voltage limit, because they're different voltages. So I tried to build a voltage divider with resistors, and I quickly found out that it wasn't accurately turning on and off every time because the voltage regulators weren't, the resistors weren't the right way to do it. So I figured out the whole, the idea of having reverse voltage and diodes and all that stuff, and that was the whole point of a signal diode. I'm like, oh, I get this. And obviously trying to do that, it worked way the hell better and way more predictive.
Awesome.
And so, yeah, that's cool.
Well, you talk about being concerned about the 3D printer burning up, but I worked on enough television sets, and I remember finding a couple of TVs that had clearly had some fireworks inside of them, including one that looked like it had a pretty raging fire going on in the high voltage cage.
If this house burned down, I highly doubt it would be from my printer. Put it that way. This house has a 1960s breaker panel and one circuit upstairs and all that stuff. So if anything burns this house down, and how often I have trouble keeping the printer running, it's probably not going to be the printer that burned my house down.
You should come down to my new house here in Parksley. It was built in 1930, and there's a lot of knob and tube wiring still in use.
I
Not all
believe
that
it.
uncommon.
Good ventilation. Doesn't overheat.
Just don't
It
touch both
it
sides.
doesn't explode when your house gets struck by lightning the way the Romex does.
Hey, ask John. He's a big proponent of that knob and tube wiring.
It was the only thing left on the one wall of my mother's house functioning after it was struck by lightning. All the copper was missing from inside the Romex.
Jeez.
Hey, how well does a 3D printer make vintage radio knobs? Are they good for that?
So the printers that we have right now have a theoretical resolution of 500 microns. So if you can stand a 500 micron level of resolution for lines, and that's good, that's what it would look like off the plate, just pulling it off and not doing anything with it. But most of the things that people do with these things involve finishing the parts, and depending on what plastic you use, people have done it with tumblers, like rock tumblers. People have used a filler, like a filler primer, like you'd use on a car, or polish it, with wet sanding. So
Yeah, it leaves a striated finish, and it's noticeably striated on the less expensive printers. So I say no, but if you could sand it down or fill it in or smooth it out on on a smooth knob, probably. But a knob that had a design in it, like a pilot knob, or a knob that had any type of knurls in it or any type of a design, it would look like hell. It's not ready for prime time yet.
I respectively disagree, because I don't think you've seen any parts that were printed on a good printer.
Well, I'm saying my printer, not a good printer.
Right.
Even back when they had the one I was telling you with the powder, they used to have a spray, and I wasn't, too involved with it, but the guy that used the thing, they had a spray that was like a heavy lacquer, and when the part was finished, they'd spray it with the heavy lacquer. And what it was...
Acetone.
Was it acetone? It was a
Probably.
self-leveling lacquer, and what it would do, it etch into the powder stuff, and it would level and actually be sort of a smooth finished surface. Now, then they would paint it, and you wouldn't know it was that powder stuff. But
Well, they used to. There's one. Matt might know more about it than I do. There's one type of material. They put it in an enclosure in an acetone mist, and that smooths it, but it also takes away some of the detail. It's, you know.
So there's about 8 different materials that home printers can print, and the most common one is PLA, which is polylactic acid, and it is not. It's very chemical resistant, meaning it's a pain in the ass to use chemicals to finish things. So the more like ABS and PETG and nylon and things like that are more likely to be able to be chemically treated with acetone or denatured alcohol, just depending on which one it is. So each material has a different way to finish it. You were talking about brush on stuff. There are people that brush stuff on the cheap plastic, the PLA, and what the most common one is right now is fiberglass resin, because that really does the best to fill in the holes and stuff. It's so damn toxic. So like a filler primer is what the most people would use, or even depending if you're going to paint it, it doesn't matter what you use. People use spackle, people use wood putty, because most of the stuff people are making is art, and if it's a functional thing, you don't care if there's lines in it most of the time.
what are you guys using as software to drive these things and to input the dimensions of what type of
So printers talking what's called G code, right? And it's basically a very similar. Yeah, I was gonna say it's a relative of CNC code.
Yeah.
And the program that you use to turn a 3D image into G code is called a slicer. And our printers come with one, so I use the one that Prusa makes. There's one by Ultimaker makes one called Kira. There's a lot of different ones out there.
The only reason I ask is because I have a CNC machine, and I'm wondering if they've come. The programs that we had for it were horrible programs. But
they're all similar. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if they've come ahead with something that's a little bit more user friendly. Let's put it that way.
I assume that I can't share my screen.
No, but I mean, I could set it up so that you could. Well, I was going to say though, Darren, the reason I bought the brand new the current generation of iPad is because it works with the Apple Pencil, and they said that there was a 3D design program out there that was absolutely bonehead easy to use on the new iPad with the Apple Pencil. So I got the iPad, I got the pencil, I got the program, but I got to get one of those round two-its also.
Yeah, let me share my screen, Dave.
Hang on.
Because I have it running. Okay. The software.
You should be able to do that now.
All right. Okay.
It did not work when I just tried to do it before, remember, so I'm not sure what's going on. Oh, there you go.
So this is one of the slicer programs that I've been using. So if you see, what you see is what it, okay, so let me go right here. This green tab is the 3D image that I was using.
Where did the image come from?
It's an internet image. There's websites where you can download files. I'm not going to go into what it is, but it's a I'll show you. I'll do another one to show you where you start. But basically, this is the object that would look like when it was built.
Right.
And then on this other tab is the software version of the same thing. And you can see that after it's done its code conversion, it has different. First of all, you can see the lines because that's the resolution I set it at.
Right.
And you can also see based on the legend up here what's different. Different things are different types of printing. The walls versus infill versus this one doesn't have any supports because there's nothing weird overhanging.
Mm-hmm.
So I can show you like the masks that Dave is printing.
It's like a meat slicer with a lot of smarts, so it knows where to add things.
I'm just, like I said, I'm trying to translate this into if I can use this on my with my CNC.
I'm told that there is no difference whatsoever between taking a model and making a model and then taking it and putting it into the slicer for the 3D printer, or putting it into the program that tells the
it's basically the reverse. You're laying material, I'm cutting it away.
It's additive versus subtractive.
Right. So this is that mask that Dave's been printing. Basically it would clip on here. These little knobs would hold the face shield.
Oh, that
on.
looks like the header for a face shield. Like
that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's what it looks like. That's a 3D object. And if I were to hit this button down here that says slice, it'll turn the code, and it'll give me a generation of what that code looks like.
I got you.
So, and this one's this is a better example why I wanted to do this one live, because you'll see different types of things you didn't see on the last one. So this green shit here is disposable plastic. This is made to spread out the bed to have more surface area to hold on to the plate.
I've seen it. Yep.
And it's meant to be broken off. It's just made because because it's moving. So if it doesn't have great grip on the surface and it moves at all, then you're screwed. So this is made to hold it down better.
Yep.
So Darren, there's a guy locally he's a robotics teacher whose son is a doctor in one of the hospitals, and his son was telling him that they just don't have any PPE anymore. They ran out, and so this guy said, "Well, hey, I have 3D printers, I have students, I have, so he started making these things, and then all of a sudden there's a whole grassroots effort. There's like dozens and dozens of people that are making these things now, and he's taking them all, putting them all together. Somebody's laser cutting the acrylic face shields, and then he takes them down to his son at the hospital.
Well,
it's an indictment of the way we run our country. But
no, Dave, it is not. And I can tell you that I work in a school building that was put into war service back during the Second World War. One of my machines actually was purchased for war production when they turned our machine shop into a war production facility as well as a manpower training facility.
Sure,
So,
it's just
not the first time schools.
Right, but I'm going to sound a little bit like you now, but it's a shame that we're spending 7 hours a piece printing out these plastic parts when they could have been cranked out 1,000 per minute on a proper assembly line. But we don't have those assembly lines anymore. They're all over in China.
Well, you don't want my answer to that, so you don't want me to tell you how that happened. But
this is all going to change now. You watch.
From your lips to Washington's ears.
I can't imagine it's going to show up on a webcam, but I can show you that you can see the difference when you have different settings on resolutions and stuff. So this is one of the ones I was making. It's a DeLorean keychain, but you can see how shitty the infill is, and I had a problem with my printer, and this is something I was working on. And this is something I also printed a couple days ago, this is the robot from the movie Metropolis. And this is, you don't really see these lines, you don't see that grooves and shit that you saw on that previous model. And I've done nothing to this. I've not sanded it. I've not polished it.
Now,
and this is not the highest resolution my printer can print.
Did that print vertical or did that print laying horizontal?
It's hard to see it, but there's three joints in here that you can see up where, like the shoulders.
Oh, I see. You made it in 3 parts.
Yes.
Okay.
So... But I didn't, those arms were attached to that top part where the shoulders are. So you see that they hang down like that. I didn't glue them to that arm, They were part of that top chest part, So, and all those details and curves and the fingers, I didn't do anything to, make this look better. I broke off the trash part and that's it.
All right, well, maybe you make me a couple of radio knobs.
So I'm just, but it has to be dialed in. Again, I'll show you because I've spent a lot of time since I'm home because I've had problems with my printer, and I've made this damn DeLorean keychain 10 times, and you can see that they have had different flaws every damn time I've made them until I got it figured out. Like this is probably one of the better ones. It's still got the grain, but it's a lot more accurate looking.
Matt, how long did it take to print that out?
The DeLorean one takes like an hour. But like this is another example. Like this one turned out visually okay, but because it wasn't adjusted, it didn't melt together very well. And you can kind of see the edges where it's peeling off. And I can bend it, and you can see that the edges are bending because they didn't melt together. So it takes a lot of patience to get these damn cheaper ones dialed in. But once they do, and if they stay, then they're good. You can let them run for hours and hours. This is another, you see this tank tread thing that I made.
Yep.
So every one of those teeth had to have that throwaway shit in there, so it had something to suspend on while it was printing.
Now, does this machine work? The one that I remember at one of the ones they had at the school with the throwaway, they used to submerge it in a solvent, and it would dissolve all that throwaway support material.
Now, this is the same stuff. It comes from the same spool.
Oh, okay.
There are ways to do that. There are printers that have two extruders, and you can do a shittier.
That I do remember. It used two different materials. Yes.
Yeah, so that's usually handy for like if you're using an expensive thing. Like, again, you're not gonna be able to see it, but this this spool here, this is a sample. This is stainless steel filament, and what it is it's just the same plastic shit as all this other stuff is, but it's filled with filings of stainless steel.
Oh,
and once you print it, you can actually polish it because you're polishing the parts of the metal that are in the suspension.
Yep.
But obviously, so like this spool, if I had they're sold in kilogram spools. So if I had a kilogram of this, it'd be like $100 versus $10 for $15 for the cheap plastic shit. So you'd use the cheap plastic shit for the grippy part, and then once you've got the base printed out, it would print out on the expensive stuff.
One of the machines they have at the school, it's an older one, they still use it, uses cartridges with the filament in them. And the cartridges cost a fortune. And the damn cartridges, when they run them down, you can't even use up all the filament that's in the cartridge. The cartridge stops when there's about 10 feet of filament left in it.
There were a couple of them that were proprietary, and they would put they did the same thing with printer cartridges. They put some sort of chip in the damn thing.
Yep, it had the chip.
Yeah, so people have actually figured out how to defeat those now, but yeah.
Well, what I was doing for a while is I have a little injection molding machine, and we were chopping up the remaining filament, and we were using it as fill for the injection molder, which was pretty cool. And then we figured out we could break up the cartridge housings too, and if we broke them up into small enough pieces, we put them in the injection molder too.
So the one thing I mean, even with the ones that aren't proprietary, the farther you get into the spool, the harder it is to print because it's so tightly wound. So it doesn't want to extrude as well because it's not a smooth peel off of the reel, and it'll actually sometimes snap, or it just under extrudes because it's having so much hard time pulling it in because it's not straight. Which is what I'm towards the end of the reel from the white spool material that I have. But it keeps me off the streets.
Is it necessary that you use it off a spool? Could you unspool it, in other words, and drape it in some fashion that
I usually, like, if I'm here for it, because I mean it's literally next to my desk, and I work 8 hours a day at home now instead of at the office. So when I'm paying attention, I just reel it back and loosen out a few, loops of it. But if I walk away, it doesn't. I mean, it'll still print. It's supposed to do it. It's supposed to pull from the reel, but if you make it easier for it, then it'll help come out better.
Sure.
I'm assuming the ones they use in industry do not have these quirky problems. So it's just the $200 home units.
They basically just hang from a pipe above the frame. That's how they come out. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do. These are actually things I've made. They're just bearings, basically. I don't remember what the number. I'm sure Darren knows. They're just standard bearings, and you put two of them together, and then the reel sits on the reel and spins.
But you probably use any available cheap surplus. You probably do it with a lot of different kinds of bearings.
Yeah, they're the same ones they were putting in fidget spinners. People were breaking them up.
Yeah, that's I forget the number. Actually, what we found with the fidget spinners, because we had the kids were making the fidget spinners at the school on the 3D printers, and the teacher that was running that whole thing was coming to me asking me all about bearings, and he's like, well, I don't understand why the bearings are too tight. And I told him, I said, you need rejected bearings? I said, and you need used bearings. Well, what do you mean? I said, you need under tolerance bearings. I said, a new bearing for a machine is not designed to be loose and free like that. It's now, you wouldn't want that in a precision machine. That's like that's a spun out bearing, basically.
Yeah, I actually figured that out inadvertently making those things, because I used fidget spinner bearings, because I'm like, well, if it spins so easy, it'd be great, but it doesn't spin that easy when it's turning at a slow rate. It gets stuck.
You know what the best bearings I found that you could purchase for that are, and I don't know anybody here if anybody's familiar with skateboards. But
yeah, that's what they talked about.
Well, not just skateboards, but a bearing that's made for a longboard. And the longboard is the long skateboard that's not made for doing tricks. It's made to use them for transportation. They'll ride them for miles and miles, and they're just designed to go. They just go free. They're very free-floating bearings. And the company that was making them was SKF made some of them, and I forget the other. Yeah, the fidget spinner bearings. Well, we found a cheap source for them, and basically what we found were reject bearings, because there's no safety factor. You're not going to lose a wheel on a vehicle.
Right.
Hey, can I change the subject for a second?
Absolutely.
Darren, you mentioned two things that piqued my curiosity, that you're using a Western Electric mic and that you have vacuum tubes in your audio chain. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. It's just this here. I don't know if you can see it. They call it a salt shaker. It's a 633A. The later ones are Altex. This one's old. It says Western Electric on the back of it. So it's just an old Western Electric dynamic microphone. I guess probably late 30s, early 40s. They made them up into the 70s, but they were made by Altec at that point.
I think I have an Altec salt shaker.
Well, what happened was when the phone company was trust busted, I think it was 1953, there was a consent decree order, and they could no longer manufacture. Western Electric could no longer sell to the public certain items. So all their speaker and microphone and audio manufacturing for theaters and studios and consumers was spun off to Altec Lansing. That's kind of how Altec was born. Altec was around before that, but they were kind of born out of Western Electric. They were born out of the phone, and then they continued to do a lot of contract manufacturing for Western Electric.
So what's your audio chain? What did you said something about?
The output of the computer is feeding into a little Stromberg Carlson amplifier. That's where I get my computer audio from.
Excellent.
If this camera were any more functional, I'd turn it around so you could see the amplifier. But yeah.
Well, thanks for that. That was good. I'm glad.
The biggest problem is the computers. I was saying this the other night. The audio card in this computer I'm using is horrible. It's a Dell Optiplex, and the built-in audio is bad, and I was getting a lot of noise but I seem to have gotten it to work okay.
All right,
Crickets.
well, I guess we're done.
Yep. All right.
I'm just tired of been sitting in here I've been sitting in the same 7 foot by 7 foot room for 12 or 14 hours today. So I'm like, yeah, it'd be nice to go sit in another room that's 10 foot by 10 foot for a few hours before bed.
I'm just waiting for this wind to die down.
Yeah, it's been nuts. It went from being 85 degrees 2 days ago to snowing.
I'm hearing my bell outside ringing like crazy.
Yeah, it's really been bad down here. It broke the glass in one of my doors. Because the door slammed open. It's nuts.
You can't even go run out and buy milk and bread right now either. So I mean,
yeah. Well, one last note as I sign off. You talk about not being able to pump gas in New Jersey. That does have a benefit. down here, I'm in farm country. And now I use a glove when I go to the gas pump and fill my truck. Not because of COVID, because one day I got into my truck and the steering wheel of my hands started to stink. A farmer was full of manure.
Yeah.
Over the pump handle. I got home, I had to wash everything.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say it was gonna melt because it was made out of cheap plastic.
That's
No.
worse.
Yeah, exactly. The gear shift, the turn directionals, everything.
You're really out in the sticks then.
Down here, there's 208 chicken farms.
Where is this?
I'm in Parksley. I'm below. You know where Ocean City is in Maryland?
Yeah.
All right, we'll keep going down the coast.
Okay.
Georgia.
I'm in Virginia, about 20 miles below Maryland,
Okay.
off Route 13.
Okay.
All right. Well, listen, I'm gonna shut this off, I think, and then we can all get together on Al's next meeting, which is coming up.
When's the next one?
I think he said he's going to do them every Monday and Wednesday.
Right.
One in the afternoon and one in the evening.
I thought he had one on the weekend or something. I remember him talking about it. Changed his mind.
I don't know. Check your email. I don't remember.
We'll just have to keep an eye open.
Yeah. Well, I do, and then I see that we had a meeting an hour ago and I missed it. That's what I usually do. That's why I said we got to schedule him, and I think he did, or he's going to.
Excellent. Gentlemen, all of you have a good night. Stay safe.
John,
Same
good
to
night.
you all.
Good night, folks.
Good
Good night.